Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video we are continuing our build collection run through with character 3. We've already done character 1 and 2, those are previous videos that you can go and watch, and we'll be doing all 5 characters in total, so 4 and 5 will follow this up in the future. In this series, I've been going through it, the entirety of the build collection, and talking about each of the builds. And in doing so, we go over what it is for, how often do I use it, and is there any use to it really? How does it stack up against other variants? And also, how hard is it to put together if you want to do so yourself? Because yeah, in the collection, there's a lot of builds. It's not always clear what is recommended. The recommended build list, of course, helps a little bit with that, I hope. But it can be kind of unclear what builds do for what, as well, as some are definitely specialized. As we go through, everything will be timestamped down below, so you can jump to a specific build if that is your intention. But let's get started. And let's, of course, start by explaining what the build collection is and what it is for. It is a Google Drive folder that is openly available if you have the link, and the link is of course in the description down below if you want to go here yourself. Here we're looking at it in the grid view, so you can toggle that in the top. And what it is a bunch of build pictures that lay out effectively an entirety of a build, so we can copy it from there. All of the stats and everything I think you need to get that build going. Now, the layout of this is that every character of mine is represented in here. The number before the dot is actually the character number. The number after the dot is the loadout. Today we'll be looking at character 3, so we'll be going from 3.01 all the way to 3.16 and going build by build. And this is also, again, then how they are saved in the game, and that's my kind of structure for it. Overall, we'll be going mostly starting with some red builds, and their first build is kind of their signature build, which I kind of consider their personality a little bit. Then we'll see some yellow builds, then we see some yellow-red hybrids, some blue-red hybrids, and then ending on some tanky builds. That's kind of the structure that I lay out. I don't always follow it to that degree because sometimes we just shuffle stuff around. And yeah, it is still trying to follow a little bit of a structure. And at the top as well, there's a recommended build list and a recommended weapons and talents list. That's the place I would recommend, as the name implies, where to start, as they lay out the builds that are definitely recommended to try out. Because not everything in this collection is that great. Some stuff is just there for testing or just playing around with certain gear sets or builds. So yeah, let's go get started here with 3.01. And we start on 3.01 with Ongoing Directive. Ongoing Directive gear set is a gear set that is centered around its bleed status effect and its marking system. It gets hollow point rounds that can buff its own damage, but also they are group-wide. Because of that, it is one of the good group supports. We saw earlier on through Patriot, and there we discussed that, yeah, it doesn't really hold a candle to Ongoing Directive or Red FI, and that very much is true. Ongoing Directive is one of my most used builds, and especially in group settings, we quite often use these, as that hollow point ammo can actually be used to bypass the ammo directives. With either Pistolero or Ammo Hoarders, we can have this ammo that it provides to the team as long as we're getting enough kills and such. As this build is getting its mark and those are dying, it will provide ammo to the team. Making it so that, for instance, with Pistolero, sometimes we do need to start a little bit with just pistoling the first enemies, and then once we have ammo, we are good, and we'll be ongoing. And if it's Ammo Hoarders, it's even easier. Because of that, this does get used a lot, even, for instance, in solo play to deal with 5 directives. Even though, for myself, in solo play 5 directives, I wouldn't go, for instance, with this full red one as we have here. As I said, this one is effectively just full red, all weapon damages, crit chances, crit damages, trying to get that weapon to deal as much as it can. That's also why on this one, I'm running it with Vigilance, but you can definitely run it with Wicked as well. Those are the 2 good backpack talents, and would definitely go for a backpack that is free talentable, so you can play with both of those talents. Wicked will have a lot more uptime because every time we apply that status effect to the enemy, it will refresh. But Vigilance will, for instance, be active against the first enemy that you're fighting when you don't have bonus rounds yet, or you don't have the hollow points around yet. And then Status will be inactive and the chest will be inactive, and then Wicked would also not trigger. So Vigilance definitely has its place, and also Vigilance is, of course, a little bit larger. But when you get hit, you lose it, of course. So there's a trade-off there, and I feel a very balanced one, actually. We'll later on actually see that I use Wicked in a different variant of this. Because yeah, there are variants to make. Here we're seeing the Tinkerer one, and Tinkerer really works well. Sadist is a really powerful talent. That'll always be our first pick for this build. It is applying bleed, and that's actually opening up this option to put Sadist there. Alongside of it, we can go with, for instance, now that we have LMGs here, we can take Frenzy alongside of it, and that makes it so that, for instance, for me, from a playstyle setting, if the fight goes on long enough, eventually we'll get into that Frenzy, and that will just melt whatever's left. And that works out very well. Otherwise, there are other good talents, and that's why we are going with Tinkerer here. Other good talents that we can go with, especially because we're applying status effect. Pressure Point applies to any status effect a full 15, and that is actually really competitive, even for instance with things like Killer. But we can also even make it more group supporty by putting Vindictive in there. Overall, this is one of the top builds I would recommend having, especially if you play in groups. In every countdown, I would say, most of the time, unless I'm doing something specific, if I don't see ongoing directive in the 8-man content, especially in countdowns, I will become the ongoing directive if I can. I don't have an ongoing directive on every character, but an ongoing directive that will work well in countdown on every character. But yeah, for the ones that do, I generally go that round because yeah, this buffing 7 other players is really strong. If we take it into the game, we'll see that it is saved as shown there. Here though, I have on my secondary LMG, I have it with Pressure Point, but this is a free talentable one, and that would be my recommendation. Make sure that generally your LMGs are free talentable. For LMGs as well, the stat that for this build definitely we want to go for is crit chance as that third stat, as that is the biggest gain overall, just because it's also a little bit larger than, for instance, DTA or DTH by number, and more uptime overall. Then what I have, and we've seen this before on other characters, is actually on the loadout save. And yeah, this again, the loadouts are basically one-to-one as I have them here. Well, at least what is saved in that loadout, not exactly the layout. And I have it saved here with 5 pieces, as we'll see as well going forward, for instance, with the Strikers and several other builds. And we've seen it in the past. The reason for that is, of course, I can load up this build. I don't want to run it as 5 pieces, of course. That's also not how I showed it there a second ago. But this gives me the options. So either I can go in here, put in that Tinkerer mask, it becomes that Tinkerer, or I can go in here, put in this Overdogs, and it becomes the Overdogs version. I don't have one on this character, but I could go from the stash and grab a Centurion, and it can become a Centurion version. And with that, it opens up a lot of options. Especially with ongoing directive, the chest is pretty good. Glass can exceed it by a little bit of damage, but it's basically not worth it. So we generally take the chest, we don't take the backpack, and that opens up the backpack to generally be the high end, and that still has 1 slot, and that's also why we also take the chest. That opens up options for other exotics to go in here. We could even go Coyote as well, because that group buff is pretty strong. Although generally I would say it's better for the ongoing directive to be running Tinkerer itself and then leaving the Coyote to, for instance, one of the other builds, because it can gain more from Tinkerer than, for instance, a Striker can. That's also why Tinkerer is a really good pick here. Although, of course, OD on OD still pretty effective as well. As we'll see later on, we have a build picture that way as too. Going back to the build picture, overall, this is one of the builds that's definitely recommended. I wouldn't make it the first red I make. Strikers would still be a little bit higher, but especially if you play in groups a lot, this can be really strong, especially if you want to play on 5 directives in group settings. This would be one of my go-tos. This just bypasses the ammo directive. That's usually the directive we need to deal with, because with the rest, things like the health pack ones, like hard to earn, and for instance, things like fragile armor and the skill ones in cool skills and scavenge skills, we just deal with. Those we can just deal with. Not having ammo is a real problem. You will die because of that. And this can bypass that completely. Then also, actually, briefly on the specializations, Gunner can, of course, for that 5 directives as well, especially with Pistolero, provide that initial ammo, and it opens up as well that we can have the extra round in the pouch. Because without Gunner, we only have a plus 35 pouch for these big box LMGs, but with Gunner, we of course have the 50. But Survivalist should definitely not be discounted, especially for seasons when it isn't Pistolero. If it is Hard One, I generally just lock these in with Survivalist. And Survivalist, especially because of that bonus for allies to status affected enemies, will be status affecting a lot of enemies, so will they themselves, because when they get hollow point rounds, that will bleed the enemy too. And because of that, that has a really high uptime for Survivalist. But yeah, here for instance, this being a season with Pistolero, I have it actually saved with Gunner, but I'll change that save quite often. Skills wise, it is a red build. We want that Revive Hive. That is my first pick generally. But alongside of that, generally a skill to make it to make that initial status effect happen. But often as well, I just take a pulse there or maybe smart cover. So overall, a very versatile build. There is also a lot of other ways we can kind of set it up. And yeah, there's a lot of variations, especially in talents and such, to kind of change it up. But definitely worth having. And then moving on to 3.02, the 0.02s in most of my characters, all my characters effectively, are their striker setups. Here we are showing it with an AR setup with the overdogs alongside of it. And all of my characters effectively are kind of set up in the same way. Let's actually start there before we go talk about what strikers is, because it is one of the top builds, definitely worth having, one of the highest recommendeds in the recommended build list. But first, let's discuss here that actually this save, as with all of my other characters, is actually all the same. We're saving it with the equalizer chest and then 5 pieces of striker. And the reason for that is that, again, I can load up the build and then come into here and have it as it is, for instance, shown there with the overdogs, which is generally one of my go-tos, especially for just general play. Overdogs is kind of hard to beat by most other things. But by saving it this way, I can also, for instance, bring in either Coyote or Tinkerer. Of course, if we're going Tinkerer, I need a different weapon. This character does have that in ARs. I generally have at least 4 ARs in their inventory, basically 2 ARs that I can slap into here. Here, a FAMAS with Killer and then unmeasured fall. That secondary we don't per se use anyway, so it doesn't matter what it is as long as it isn't named like this mechanical animal. But yeah, we can, for instance, do that and then go in and grab those two ARs. And then, for instance, I'm set up now for Tinkerer. Could go Centurion. I could go basically even Memento if I wanted to. By laying it out like that, you're opening up for some options. But then actually even more than that, especially with Striker, because there is definitely a case to be made for Chest Striker in certain situations. And if we have it just like this, I can load it up even have a Chest Striker here. As we have the chest for it, I can bring that in. Now, of course, here we would need to, for instance, swap in some of the other pieces. But generally, on most of my characters, I would have, for instance, here, I could put in this Unit Alloys mask and then with the overdogs. Or I could, for instance, have this Cheska piece or this Unit Alloys piece or this Gruba piece and the Tinkerer or Centurion or other things like that. And that opens up a lot of options. You want to have those options because with strikers, it is a really powerful build. But for general play, and that's also the reason we generally basically in the build collection, I've taken to showing it always with Obliterate here mostly. Equalizer, of course. If we're going Obliterate nowadays, yeah, we're going Equalizer. We're showing it like that, but definitely the Chest Striker for certain places, especially Incursion is one of the standout places where we can stack up, especially with that ACS very quickly. And nowadays, even quicker with the Stack Broker, which we have one of, and hopefully in the future we'll get multiple of. That's also the reason that it's actually not on the character with an ACS. Because, of course, I only have one of them, as most people do, and 4 characters. So until I have 4, I don't want to pick a favorite, so it's staying in the stash. And I'll grab it if I'm doing something important, like an incursion run or something, and we need that power. But yeah, Chest Striker, when we can stack to 200, is a really powerful option. The thing is, though, and you can basically analyze your own gameplay for this and look at, you know, when you're running a mission, legendary or whatever's, and basically you need to be most of the time above 150 stacks. That is the crossover point overall between Obliterate Striker and a Chest Striker. Once the Chest Striker reaches above 150, now it's doing more damage. But you generally need to be above it, because also getting up to there, you are doing less damage than the Obliterate Striker, which was stacking faster. That's why an Obliterate Striker is kind of the general meta, and then the Chest Striker is actually, you know, the powerhouse for certain places. The thing is, though, that Chest Striker can do a ton more damage. There's basically a 20% gap between those two. And when we're talking about especially Strikers being kind of OP, it is especially that Chest Striker variant in the places where we can stack it to 200 consistently that really shines and is much brighter than any other build around. Because nowadays, there's definitely some competition for Strikers in the form of tipping skills and also concentrated company. Both are actually pretty close with Obliterate variants to this Obliterate Striker as well. So nowadays we have a little bit more options than we used to have, but yeah, Strikers is still the go-to. This is the quintessential red build that we pull out when we need to get shit done. Quite often the text that we use for this is when the going gets tough, the tough grab their Strikers. And that holds true even to this day. The way we're setting it up here, yeah, with the Equalizer has taken over. Basically, if we're going Obliterate with some exceptions, and they're very minor. So for instance, DNH chest that we'll see in a little bit on this character, or that we can put on this character for an Tempest tech tank, that can beat out an Equalizer. Later on also we'll see I'll have one Cheska Obliterate chest, and that's for instance for the case of a Backfire. But yeah, in almost all cases, the Equalizer is the way to go if we're going for Obliterate. Overdog's very powerful, of course. ACS as well, just to point out, the stacking on shotguns is per pellet, not for Obliterate, but it is for Strikers. So using an ACS like this that hits 8 pellets per shot means that its RPM of 300 base, although of course here with Striker and Equalizer it's plus 20%, but that 300 would already become a 2400 if all of our pellets hit. It's basically that 300 times 8. And yeah, 2400 is, well, double of a vector, and yeah, a lot more, triple almost of our main weapon here in the Lexington at 850. But the thing also with the Obliterate variant is that, yeah, we don't per se need to stack up that high, and because of that, we can actually just stack with the AR and just be fine. We don't need to stack with that ACS. But it can be nice for certain situations, especially if there are just some enemies close by, because also that is a powerful tool for just ending them outright. But yeah, definitely also consider putting other weapons there. For instance, putting just an SMG or an LMG there just for a different ammo type. That can also be a really good option. And also likely a future toolbox that I want to go into. Quickstep has taken over most of the pistol slots here, of course. But yeah, as we discussed there, we can go with a lot of different options in exotics, but also we can go with glass, for instance. Glass, well, the gap has been kind of closed by Equalizer giving us 24% on the Obliterate instead of the 20 that it used to be. Although in the long past, it was, of course, 25, although in the long past, it was also 15. But yeah, the normal has been 20 for a while, but now Equalizer coming in with 24. That's a lot closer to that 30 of that glass, of course. But glass is still active from the first shot, and there is some value there as well. As you can, especially with a build like this needs to stack up to kind of get going in the way that, in the inverse way of basically, for instance, Umbra that has upfront damage, or CoCo that can keep its stacks for long. Strikers can't, but it can stack up really quickly, especially with an ACS. But that can, for instance, be a little bit mitigated by taking a sacrifice. And even, for instance, one thing you could consider is going sacrifice and gift. But with some of the exotics now existing, yeah, I don't feel it's worth it to give up that backpack slot, because especially what that backpack slot opens up for us is the options of exotics. Yeah, overall, one of the highest recommended builds, mostly as well, because it's really easy to put together. It is a red core build, and we have red stats underneath it. Getting an Equalizer isn't too hard. Just also to point out, the Overdogs is actually available nowadays in targeted loot, and overall the best way that I would recommend of getting it, if you don't have one yet, is to actually go and do Hyena Retaliations. In there, you can set your target to gloves, you might get it to drop, but also the blueprint for it is for a completion as a completion reward for Hyena Retaliations. So if you do enough Hyena Retaliations, you'll eventually get the blueprint. You might even be on your first one if you get lucky. Or you might get it to drop through the target loot system. So basically you're double dipping into it there. And that is usually the best ways to go about getting some of those exotics. Overall, highly recommended, and basically I feel every person needs to have a striker. Even if you don't like running it, you should know at least what it can do. As we come to 3.03, and yeah, the point threes or the 0.03s on most of my characters are usually high-end builds, with the exception of character 5, as we'll see later. Most of the time, high-ends have kind of been exceeded, especially in the red section, by going some of the gear sets. Most of the gear sets can basically outdo what a high-end can do, especially for most fights that we care about. Strikers, for instance, still needs to sometimes stack up, but once it gets stacking up, even a glass high-end, effectively at 50 stacks, an Obliterate striker has it beat. And of course, that's an Obliterate striker, and then also it still has 50 stacks to go. Because of that, we don't use high-ends much anymore, but they do want to keep some around just to, for instance, yeah, mess around, or to go for unique things. On character 1, we saw, for instance, a Pestilence setup. That works out really well as a high-end, even though now it has competition from a concentrated company. On character 2, we saw a rifle build that actually had a little bit more weapon handling than most builds would. And here, actually, I'm going with the 3-piece of unit alloys. Generally, we don't want to go with the 3-piece unit alloys. To get it into a gear set, we need to use the Ninja Bike. The Ninja Bike costs way too much, especially, for instance, if we're sticking it on strikers and such. You're just better off not going for that extra 50% on the mag. But here on the high end, we don't have those constraints as much. So here, what I've chosen to do is actually with this Obliterate high end specifically is, of course, yeah, there we're going with the equalizer. We're taking the salvo as well. We're taking a 3rd-piece unit alloys. Once we've invested 2 pieces into it, as long as it's, for instance, here with the high end, that 3rd piece doesn't cost too much because this is around like 3 or 4% of our damage. If, for instance, instead of this, we went with some other brand. Now, of course, actually the option, the layup or the layout for that would be actually to move either the Chesco or the Grupo to this slot and then have a Fox's Prayer coming. That still is one of the better options layout-wise. But if we're going 3 pieces, actually we're putting our crit chance so low that the Cheska, especially with Killer, actually outcompetes the Fox's Prayer in this layout. So yeah, again, if we give up the unit alloy here on the mask, yeah, the Chesco Grupo should go there and you should bring in Fox's Prayer. But in this specific layout, as we have it here, where we want to go with the 3-piece unit alloys, then actually, yeah, Chesco Grupo makes the most sense. Here we're going again with the Overdogs, as yeah, that is still, of course, yeah, one of the top picks and one of the ways to kind of at least bump this up a little bit. The thing with this build, of course, is yeah, it needs to stack a lot less. It has only Obliterate, but if we also don't want to stack as much, for instance, that ongoing directive we saw earlier can do more damage than this, but would be an issue, for instance, against mechanicals and such, because that's one of the downsides of ongoing directive. If we take it into the game, we actually see that my save is a little bit different than what we have exactly there, and that is that I have 4 pieces of unit alloys, and that should give away as well that, yeah, that's not intended to be a ran in this way, but when we load up this build, this again as well is to give me options. I can, of course, putting that Overdogs, this is the build picture, but instead of that, one of the things I can do is, instead of that, go here, for instance, with a Tinkerer instead, if I want to play around with that, and still have the 3-piece here as we have it. I would need to, of course, replace my secondary. We can't have it be an AR and a rifle, but of course, as we saw earlier, I do have a trade-in weapon. So by saving it in that way, it also opens up options here. I've been enjoying actually having 75 rounds on the FAMAS. It feels a little bit weird of being used to a FAMAS that has 50 rounds and then just it keeps going a little bit longer than you're expecting. And overall, it is gaining quite a bit in sustain. One of the options that this also has is actually that 75 round mag on a FAMAS, for instance. As my secondary, I've been taking to having, instead of measured here, fast hands, having more ammo in the magazine, and then also having a faster reload actually works out really well, especially as well as we can get more stacks of fast hand going as well. But yeah, I've been actually enjoying running this, but it isn't powerful enough to outright recommend. It is definitely better, actually, than some of the older versions we used to have, so I would recommend taking at least the 2-piece unit alloy, especially for an AR setup. That does beat, even for instance, in what some people consider as raid setups and such, that does beat, of course, out a lot of other options, especially that second piece unit alloy bonus being that 20% assault rifle damage, when that first piece is also 5% rate of fire, which is a good bonus, but this is a great bonus. And with their powers combined, the two-piece is extremely strong. And in every high-end, basically, it should be two-piece unit alloys, especially if you're going ARs. And of course, that also brings up the options of salvo and equalizer. And salvo here definitely makes sense, where we are putting it up in a setup where it isn't with strikers or with Umbra or such, where it would feed into even more rate of fire than, for instance, those sets already have. If we go back to the build picture, yeah, we do have, of course, other options to run it with. For instance, there's a reason that this is the Cheska slot, because we could, of course, do it the other way around, or put the units, basically, the salvo, the equalizer, and the overdogs are locked into their places, but the other three, basically, we could shuffle them around. By having it be that Cheska over there, we can take Thermal. This isn't per se the build I would put Thermal on. It is definitely, it can hit hard enough for it to be worth it, but I would much rather have it on a stacking build, for instance, where also it can help with stacking, because you can just stay on the same target for longer while still doing damage to other things. Of course, as we saw, yeah, we can go with other exotics, but also, again, sacrifice, gift, of course, an option. And later on, actually, we'll see a variant of this, yeah, where we put in a sacrifice and a gift, and of course, keeping the two-piece unit alloys for that AR. And that works out, of course, to be a pretty decent-ish build as well. Overall, the high-ends they don't keep up against a lot of the gear sets, because if I want that upfront damage, I also always have the option of ongoing directive. That has the downside that, yeah, it doesn't work as well against mechanical. So, for instance, Black Dusk missions, they're a little bit less effective there, because, yeah, the mechanicals don't bleed, so Sadist doesn't become effective. But we also always have Umbra, which it has a stacking mechanic, but it has an upfront stacking mechanic. Now, as well, with CoCo coming in for longer engagements, for longer missions, especially in group settings, yeah, that works out to be a really good choice. These have kind of fallen away. Still worth considering and playing around with. Now with the three-piece unit alloys, this at least has something unique for me with a little bit larger of a mag. And that has been my reason to still keep it around and play around with it as well. And on 3.04, we see a refactor. Most of my characters on the 0.04, there's something that can heal. And I bring it like that, and it's not a healing build effectively, because, for instance, things like this, where it isn't a direct healing build, of course, the way that refactor works is when my skills do any damage, that damage comes back to us percentage-wise as some healing. And that is group-wide, a little bit less for me than for my teammates. And yeah, because of that, it's actually a really strong build. Earlier on Character 2, we actually saw a high-end TurretDrone build. The only thing that the high-end TurretDrone build kind of has going over the refactor, although basically a minor point over it, is that it can do a little bit more damage with its capacitor, because we're going to have those crit chances and crit damages. For the rest of it, definitely I would say nowadays the refactor has displaced high-end versions of TurretDrone builds really in most cases. You do give up a little bit of, for instance, having either armor regen or for instance, damage on the weapon. But of course, armor regen, this can do as well. It just doesn't do a true regen. It just does its healing mechanic, its damage and then healing mechanic. Because of that, refactors have actually taken over the place mostly of high-end TurretDrone builds. Here we have it with, yeah, 4 pieces of refactor without the chest and the backpack, those being high-ends, 2-piece units, or 2-piece, as yeah, they're the same models as unit alloys, so my brain just there went like, it's unit alloys. No, it's HANA-U, of course, the original model for those pieces. And yeah, we're taking kinetic momentum, and yeah, that works either with kinetic momentum or with glass. It works out pretty well. We can also take the chest, but I generally choose not to. I feel the healing is already enough on this gear set, and adding to its damage works out to be, makes it so that you're less dependent on your allies. What taking the chest could open up, though, is to take some other skills or some other exotics, and then we would generally as well maybe take some other skills. So with Btsu glove coming in, for instance, we could go with the Stinger Hive or such to deal some damage, and then have the Btsu and have a supercharge or such, kind of in the style of that we saw already, though, with the refactor that was set up for status effect on Character 2. Refactor, though, has become one of the stalwart builds of the game. It is definitely one of the go-tos if you're, for instance, just random matchmaking legendaries. Generally nowadays it's kind of accepted that this is one of the better things to stick in there, even though an experienced player on Foam Eclipse is gonna do much better. An inexperienced player will still do fine on a refactor build. So if we take it into the game, it is actually saved up in that way. I do have the chest actually in the stash. Now, of course, the chest of this isn't too hard to get going anyway. It would come with a yellow core, so we just, need to put skill damage alongside of it and stick in a mod, and it can go. So we could even craft it as needed. Of note, actually, Refactor is a little bit weird. It is one of two gear sets, the other being System Corruption, that actually has different cores depending on the side of it. On the left side, we have it all being skill tier, so any of the three pieces on the left, the mask, the chest, and the holster, they will always come with skill tiers. The right side always comes with blue cores. So because of that, these do need to be recored, so the right side pieces do need to be recored. And here, of course, because we have Technician, we're getting a skill tier from there. I've changed this to be a weapon damage. The Technician is definitely one of the top picks to go for this because, yeah, you can get some extra skill damage out of it, but also, for instance, for its Faraday effect for the turret, even when there is disruption going on, which, for instance, in some legendaries, especially in Capital, there is, of course, the main entryway where we have a jammer going. This can still perform because then we can at least get our turret out and get some damage out and some healing. And that's the strength of this. This can do decent amounts of damage, but then from its damage, we're basically at 20% going to our allies, 10% going to ourselves. And because of that, it has a lot of utility, doing damage and then also healing pretty effectively. I'm taking Kinetic Momentum, and then here, perfect Combined Arms. Other choices you can make as well is go to Tech Support, and also with Tech Support, or even as well Hermano, actually. You can go Brazos, which is the brand of Hermano. And if you're going Brazos, you can actually go two-piece Brazos, and that is, of course, for skill haste and then skill tier. That's actually worth more than, for instance, the skill damage, because, yeah, you can trade in that skill tier for instance, having 2 extra blue cores or having an extra red there. So that can also be definitely a pick. Overall, though, I just go the easy way where we are taking the Force Multiplier, one of the better bonuses, especially as well as this is a little bit more in its perfect Combined Arms on the damage end than the normal Combined Arms would be with 25%. And the two-piece gives us skill haste and skill damage. And we do actually want a little bit of skill haste here because, yeah, actually not having that second stat available, of course, eats into that a little bit. Capacitor then is the tool of choice to pair with this. It does decent damage on itself, and then also that skill tier gain going to weapons helps with that, and of course it adds to our skill damage. Overall, this is definitely a pretty easy build to put together. As well, the capacitor is actually gettable if you don't have one yet. It is from the challenges in the summit. You have to only complete 5 challenges. They are in the map. You basically go in there, you have to set challenges and then do them. None of them are per se too hard. You could likely, get it done in 10 minutes if you know what you're doing, maybe half an hour if you don't. That'll get you your first capacitor. That is account wide. That isn't per character or such. That is once per account. But once you have that one, yeah, make sure it's favorited and don't lose it. The rest of the gear set is pretty easy to get. We do, as we discussed, though, we need to record 2 pieces over here, which can cost a little bit in optimization. But overall, that's still pretty cheap in comparison. One of these in a legendary is pretty fine. You wouldn't want multiple, but for instance, it's actually one of the step-in points for people going into legendary. And I feel that definitely works out. They are a little bit too slow for just general play, or for instance, for using in heroic and such. That's generally been the issue with TurretDrones as well, because it doesn't have the damage that you would much more prefer on especially heroic. That isn't to say as well that, yeah, for instance, a Foam Eclipse would definitely be a higher choice for me, and especially if we're running it in an experienced group, but this doesn't need an experienced player behind it, and that's its strength. Overall, worth considering, especially if you want to try out TurretDrone, and honestly, I would, in most cases, pick this over the high-end TurretDrones. As we come to 3.05, the Eclipse on this character, generally as well, the 0.05s are Eclipses or similar status effect kind of builds. As on character 2, we saw a refactor set up for status effect. Eclipses are one of the go-tos for especially heroic in fire form and on legendary in foam form. We'll see actually several ways that we can set it up. We've already seen a glass version that had a glass chest, and then instead of that, the glove was just the Eclipse piece. Here we're seeing what I consider the baseline, as we showed as well with that character. I basically have the pieces there to make it like this, because this is the go-to for Eclipse. The chest and the backpack, both are really good. We're taking a valve, we're taking an electric piece, and then pairing that with getting the 4 pieces of Eclipse going. What this does is any status effect that it applies, it will actually spread on kill. And it doesn't need to be your kill, it doesn't need to be effectively through the status effect or anything. If they die with a status effect on them that was applied by the player running this, it will be spread. So we just send some fire cam mostly their way, setting some enemies on fire. That, of course, will also debilitate them, making it a crowd control setup. And while they're on fire, our allies will hopefully shoot them, as this is especially also a group build, I would say. I wouldn't run this solo. I tend not to. I prefer other things solo, especially. And because of that, I run these mostly in groups, especially on Heroic. A setup like this is really powerful in the hands of somebody that knows where is, the things where they're going to spawn. Having the game knowledge really helps out in Eclipse, because playing it proactively, setting basically in ambush, just setting the fire cam already in the place where the enemies are going to spawn, really is a difference from that than trying to go like, oh, they're spawning over there, I'm going to try and catch them, because that's usually a lot harder with this build. So it does help to have some game knowledge with this, but this can also be the thing to create that game knowledge. One of the reasons I know a lot of the spawns is because I've had to learn them, because I run Eclipses a lot. Overall, as I have also made an Eclipse Masterclass even, which is basically a build showcase, but then way extended, I would say that I'm pretty proficient with Eclipses, and also I would almost say nowadays a little bit less so, because especially a lot of the modifiers of the seasons aren't really aligning with skill builds in general, and Eclipse is a skill build. I would definitely call myself quite often an Eclipse main, almost, as I enjoy playing, as we often call it, a fire mage in a game full of warriors, effectively, where all the other builds are basically kind of like warriors or paladins and stuff like that. This is kind of something completely different. Because of that, I enjoy it a lot, and it is very effective, especially on Heroic in this form for the fire. We'll see on character 4 a Foam Eclipse that'll be much more set up for the Legendary, and there as well, it is my go-to, especially in 4-man teams, to have 1 Foam Eclipse and then 3 damage dealers, usually chest strikers. Here, we're setting up it up with that electric piece here, electric, of course, with status effect on it. And we're going just all status effects on all pieces, and then the secondary skill haste. Of note here, I'll just point out that some people, because I've seen that mistake propping up more recently, again, because we haven't been hammering on it, skill duration doesn't really help much here. Skill duration, for instance, for the fire cam is how long the gas cloud stays in the world. Not its fire duration, not anything of that. Same for the hive, it isn't for the stinger hive that I'm, for instance, using here. It would not be its bleed duration or such. It is just when I throw it out, how long will it stay on the ground out there before it completely, runs out of its timer. Basically meaningless. Because of that, we lean towards skill haste, definitely. If we take it into the game, it is actually exactly saved like that. And this is then also the baseline Eclipse, as I quite often call it. And this is my go-to version as well of it. One thing we could do is, as we saw on the build picture, we could, of course, move this from the glove slot to, for instance, having it be that snow machine just for the little pretty sparkles that it creates. But I generally have it set up in this way because the glove slot is one of the variants that I used to run as well, is to put, for instance, this electric piece over there and run it with a Btsu glove, which we still do actually with foam eclipses quite often. But generally nowadays, I run it mostly just with that Val mask there. Skill-wise, I really like the Fire Cam and I like the Stinger Hive. They are both very powerful tools, and I very much like the Fire Cam more than the Fire Sticky. The Fire Cam has 8 rounds, and especially once you learn that you can double tap to ignite, and I'll include that here just because I know a lot of people don't know that. If you send out the Fire Cam, once it's dissipated on the ground, the cloud is on the ground, you can double tap, as it states here, to detonate, and that will ignite it. So you don't have to shoot into it, you can just set the Fire Cam out, multiple even, double tap, it ignites all of them. The only reason to shoot a fire cam is just if you want to ignite one of them and not all of them, and that sometimes does come up. Scorpio is my go-to as an extra source for dealing some status effect, especially as well. Even reds and purples, when they get poisoned, so just shooting them twice, they will hunch over, they will just basically get staggered. That is a great opening, of course, as I can do 2 shots of this and then bring out my fire cam and land that underneath them in that moment that they're kind of stuck. We're going with the lefty, of course, and then survivalist. The lefty here for perfect sledgehammer, and then the survivalist bringing its fire grenades, which even the lingering fire of it will trigger sledge on enemies that do get set on fire. Of course, yeah, quick step here as one of the go-tos, just to zoom around faster. Specialization-wise, if we go back to the build picture as we have it there, survivalist is my go-to always for this. Well, not always, mostly for this. That bonus to allies, and as I said, I mostly run it in group settings. Survivalist, the flame grenades is really good. The bonus to my allies, to status affected enemies, that I'm, that's the thing I'm doing anyway. If I'm doing it right, every enemy will be status affected, and that helps out quite a lot. 10% is quite a bit. Firewall can work out solo. It has burn duration that it has, and that can help, for instance, solo to kind of help out. There is something to be said, as some people do enjoy running fire eclipses solo, mostly on challenging and 5 directives, because it can deal well enough with that, because we can just set the things on fire from activity. On challenging, everything will die, especially if we are running firewall. And that can be a farming method, not one that I per se enjoy, but I'll point it out. Demo is not an option. You don't go for the Valtics. Don't put China here, as you may have seen from some other people discussing that. That's basically always hurting their fire, which the Val is just a bonus. We don't go for upping this too much, no, because we would give up way more on our main damage dealers. Because of that, these two are the specializations I go for. Also, firewall, just to point that out, because otherwise I know that comment is going to happen. There is the shotgun that it has, the double barrel sawn-off, with which you can set, for instance, warhounds on fire. That's trivia. You can't set a warhound on fire enough to damage it. You would need to do multiple times, and especially nowadays with diminishing returns, that doesn't work out. But I wouldn't. The firewall having that is basically a meaningless point of trivia at this point. Overall, one of the top builds to get together. It is also pretty easy. Valmask is, for instance, available through just target loot. It is also in the retaliation system. All of these pieces will come with that yellow core already, so basically that is there, so we can just put status effect alongside of it, a few mods, and then these skills you of course already have, and of course because we are using skills, we don't need it maxed out the way we do for weapons. We don't need, for instance, a D-Talk weapon there with a free talent or such. No, the skills are much easier to use. So this can be, from that perspective, a good way to start out, but also it requires quite a bit of game knowledge that newer players wouldn't have. But that does mean that, for instance, when I go to a new account in the future, I'm planning a 4th account. This will be one of the first builds I put together, and especially for experienced players, maybe going from one system to another, this is actually one of the top recommendations to put together first, because it is so easy, and you don't need effectively, maxed out weapons and such, because the skills are doing that. And on slot 3.06, we see a different way of setting things on fire. And that is X0. Now, overall, I'll just start by prefacing overall. That was also the conclusion when we build showcase this, is that why go with this when you can be Eclipse? This is just Eclipse, but worse. Overall, especially with an experienced player, there are some situations where this could make a little bit more sense, but we don't have those situations much in the division. X0, it is that it takes the Ortiz X0 gear set. It takes the flame turret, and instead of it being in a cone, it makes it in a circle, adds some bonuses to it. This was an interesting gear set that they introduced, mostly because it was designed specifically to work with a certain skill and then change that skill as well. We have other gear sets nowadays as well, with, for instance, measured assembly, which is definitely designed to be used with a hive and the smart cover, but it doesn't change them. This completely changes the flame turret. Effectively, what it does in the background is turn it into a hive, actually, but a flame hive. And that is pretty potent, except that, we have already Fire Eclipse, and Fire Eclipse can set a wave on fire. It spreads out, and then everybody's on fire as well. This, if we had, for instance, a sort of like King of the Hill or hold this position kind of game mode, this could be actually very strong. If we had resistance in Division 2, for instance, Division 1 game mode, this could actually be decently strong because it doesn't lack in damage per se, or its availability to do crowd control in similar ways as Eclipse. It's just that the Eclipse is partially a little bit more damage, and then on top of that, it is much more usable, especially with Firecam. Because of that, X0 just gets kind of forgotten about to the degree that I don't think in the last year, I might have pulled this out maybe twice, but I don't even remember pulling it out. So maybe we didn't pull it out at all. In the layout that I have it here, we're taking 4 pieces of X0 with a sacrifice chest here and then the Btsu data gloves. As we saw with a lot of builds, Btsu data gloves can be really powerful just for that overcharge mechanic that it has. This would, again, be a build I would mostly run in a group, kind of to do the role of an Eclipse, but then just play something different. That's usually as well why I still have it around, just to have that playstyle of it. And yeah, we are taking a Stinger Hive with it, and then with the Btsu data glove, I can overcharge myself, also reset at that point this turret. So if the turret runs out, I can always use this Btsu data glove once every 2 minutes to just bring back another one. That's actually the main use of it, because the fire turret actually has a really long cooldown before it comes back. So mitigating that helps quite a lot. We can also go with other choices, for instance, as well nowadays, X0 or with X0 to take it with Hermano, because that can also have a lot of cooldown reduction. But overall, though, I like this version still the best. And on, of course, in the group setting, that overcharge, and the reason I call it a supercharge with the Btsu data gloves, is that it is group wide. As long as you're skill tier 6, which we are here, of course, so we apply it to the entire team, resetting their hives, giving them very powerful skills as well. In a coordinated team, this is a really strong tool. If we take it into the game, we see actually that this one is also one of those that is saved as 5 pieces just to give me the options. So we can put several different things in here. Now, of course, a vial just can make sense. We could even go, for instance, with a catalyst that we have nowadays, especially when we're taking the backpack. This backpack is uniquely as well. It isn't plus 25% weapon damage. This is a separate multiplier that can even apply, for instance, to ballistic skills. Now, we're using the turret already, so we can't have the sniper turret or the normal turret, of course, but it does apply to the drone as well. And this 25% is actually pretty strong. So actually, this with the catalyst is a decent option for this, just to buff up our damage, because that increases our weapon damage or our weapons damage to any enemy set on fire by this. Now, one thing I've been considering also making is a skill damage variant of this, but especially now with the diminishing returns on status effects, I don't think that would work out now, but that would increase the turret's damage a little bit against the hits on the enemies. It is continuously setting the enemies on fire anyway, so we wouldn't need the duration to be there that much. But now with diminishing returns, it means that it will actually make it so that they are getting reduced durations much quicker, because the duration's already shorter, so they'll go immune quicker. There's also line of sight issues with the turret as well, which is actually one of the things I would think, if they change that, would help quite a lot. A fire cam can, for instance, be spread, especially the fire of the Eclipse can be spread across a door boundary. So if there's enemies inside, I set something outside on fire, it can spread. But even the fire cam, if it's on the door, effectively, it can set on fire inside and outside. The turret, as it is here, any enemy that is inside of a door boundary when they're spawning before they come out of the door, effectively, they can't be set on fire. And that's actually one of the downsides of this as well. To go back to its varianting, there's also the reason that I have this Acosta go back for it, because that's also an option with this, where we can just throw a grenade, and then that can be our source of overcharging for ourselves. But yeah, as we discussed, yeah, mostly I run it with the Btsu data gloves. One choice we could make here as well, and actually that holds true for the refactor we saw a second ago, is blacklisters. Now, blacklisters for builds that aren't per se directly engaging the enemy in the way that, for instance, the refactor is, where we can kind of leave it to our skills to kind of deal with the enemy, or we could mark something that is more closer to them, and it doesn't. The blacklister, same as glass, doesn't have transitive properties to our skills. So our skills don't take 60% more damage because we have perfect glass here. and neither do they from the blacklisters. So here as well, because we can mark an enemy that is going to be most likely on fire, blacklister is a choice here as well. And that 20% would actually, from a damage perspective, beat out any other choices we could have here, of course. So there are some choices like that that I want to play around with, actually going back to maybe some X0, but also, for instance, with that refactor, actually, blacklisters could be an option. Going back to the build picture, overall, a pretty easy build to put together as we are. We're reusing a bunch of pieces that we've seen already, but commonly used pieces as well. Lefty, capacitor. Here I'm running with survivalist, same reason as before, where we can have it be with our allies, getting 10% to the enemies we are setting on fire, or any status effect that we apply to them, including the bleed from the hive as well. If we go technician, though, we can have this sacrifice be a lot easier to get, because then we don't need this to have a yellow core. Here, of course, with survivalist, we need all of the yellow cores. We want to be 6 skill tiers. Because of that, yeah, we need then yellow cord sacrifice, which is a little bit hard to get. As an option, what you can go with as well, which is a tiny bit less damage. Actually, the damage difference between these isn't per se worth the sacrifice, honestly, but I have one. I have the blueprint as well, and can make one easily. So I've gone that route, but an electric piece, and then with glass there. The electric piece, of course, comes with the yellow core, so that makes it a lot easier. We just need 2 of the parts to be there, either skill haste or skill damage, or the glass. 2 out of 3 we need there, and then the third we can put on it. But even if you just have skill damage and then you put glass alongside of it, missing out on a skill haste isn't the end of the world. And yeah, we have the other variants here as well. Of note as well, with the technician, one thing we get there as well is the artificer hive. The artificer hive can increase the duration of our turret, and then of course, if we're going the Btsu route, we can also deconstruct it afterwards. That way as well, it can be, if you're alongside of, let's say, maybe a refactor or something, that can boost them as well. As of course, when we deploy this will apply its charges to any nearby skills. So overall, it isn't a bad build. It is especially one of those builds where there's just a better one. Another example is especially Red Heartbreaker. Red Heartbreaker isn't a bad build. It's just that Striker exists and is a better build. So why would you go with the lesser one? The same holds true here. Why would we go X0, especially when we don't have the content for it? As a source, as a defensive measure, this can be really, really strong and much stronger than a Fire Eclipse. But we just don't have those places. We are mostly just moving forward through missions, through control points, and things like that. And even the short defenses we do on control point aren't, for instance, as long as we would have in Resistance, as an example we used earlier. So overall, not per se a highly recommended one. Pretty easy to put together if you are a player that already enjoys Eclipse or maybe other things like mortar builds and stuff. Maybe worth considering playing around with. But yeah, it doesn't actually get any real high recommendation. As we come to 3.07, and there we have a Striker TurretDrone Hybrid. I shorten these quite often to TurDro, and that's also trying to imply they aren't full turret drone builds. They're kind of halfway on the turret, halfway on the drone. So TurDro. And these are TurretDrone hybrids, as stated, kind of. And they are builds where we take especially skill tiers to kind of get the skills to skill tier 6, but the rest of the build is mostly going towards the capacitor here. And I like this playstyle a lot. We've already seen a negotiator version of this style of build. In the future as well, on character 4, we'll see a strike, or alongside the Striker one, also a CoCo one. So yeah, there are multiple ways of setting these up, and what we especially take is gear sets for it. As yeah, some of the gear sets, as we discussed with the high ends when we were going over those, a lot of the gear sets outperform, especially on the weapon damage and most of the high ends. In the past, you could also make this out of high-end setups. They were sometimes a little bit, competitive, but especially ever since Strikers came in, and nowadays as well. CoCo, for instance, coming in really aligns well with it. Here we're taking Sacrifice specifically because the glass will apply both to our skills and then also to our weapon. And what we're set up for is, yeah, those 6 skill tiers as we have here. And you have 5 on the gear, or well, 4 on the gear, 1 on this Memento exotic, and then we have 1 from Technician, getting us just to 6 skill tiers here on our skills. That helps them especially to kind of get leveled up through their weapon damages or through their damages, and especially as well their health and armor goes up. The way that this gets played is mostly that these skills go out and they're basically very effective decoys. And while they're doing their thing and also dealing a little bit of damage, not a lot, in comparison to a full turret drone, definitely not a lot on those skills, we do deal a decent amount, especially once we get the striker stacks going. Now here, of course, we could actually, yeah, that's why it has an ACS secondary. We could stack a little bit with that, with InSync here, but especially just with this, I mostly just run the capacitor as we have it here. Just get the stacks going there. That gets us a little bit of skill damage as well, just to get this a little beefed up, and we hit decently hard at full stacks. Now, of course, getting the capacitor, the striker, to the 100 stacks with the capacitor does take a little bit. It isn't the fastest firing gun, but we can get there pretty consistently. If we take it into the game, it is exactly saved as shown there. In the past, I used to actually have it where we had the option to, for instance, take Coyote, or even, for instance, trying around with Tinker and such. But I've taken actually to saving it nowadays with just the Memento there. The Memento is way too good of a piece to not include into most TurretDrone hybrids, as unlike, well, with the Negotiator, we didn't on Character 1, but there we had a really good backpack in the Negotiator backpack. Here, the Striker backpack, while good, doesn't give us and weapon damage and skill efficiency. We're basically eating in both sides of that, and then the regen is actually pretty nice as well. What we're focusing on, I'm not going around and picking up the short timers pickups at all. I'm just going to charge up the Memento over time, doing several activities or just doing several rooms of a mission. I'll charge up the Memento, especially on its long buff, and that's the part I'll rely on. That skill efficiency and that weapon damage is pretty nice in here. And then we can make the capacitor hit decently hard. And by also saving it this way, in the past, this used to be with then if we, for instance, are taking things like the overdogs, for instance, but then that doesn't apply to the turret and drone. That does apply to some other skills, but not to the turret and drone. Or if we are taking things like the Coyote, yeah, we would need this chest to be yellow cored. Now, I have that option here. As we can see, the core has been recorded, but just to present it in that way and make it easier for people to kind of understand that you don't need this chest to be recorded. We're just going this way. And also, honestly, I just run it in the Memento way only. Overall, these are decently powerful builds, and I enjoy them quite a lot, especially for solo play. This can be a decent way of having, for instance, yeah, some coverage by your turret and drone, and then you basically sit a little bit more behind them and just do your damage out that way. But especially what they are nice for is that they can do decent amounts of damage in that way. And honestly, I quite often find myself preferring going this than just a full red just by itself, because it gives me a few more tools available to deal with enemies. Just because, yeah, the turret and drone, they can actually really drag some enemies away from you. Of making it is a little bit harder because, yeah, we are going with record pieces. That means we need to find, for instance, for the striker pieces here, we need to find them with the right stat, and then we put the core alongside of it. The sacrifice as a full red that we're keeping it here isn't too hard to get. And then, yeah, a Memento that can be gotten through the backpack target loot or through retaliation, where you can get the blueprints. Capacitor, again, can be gotten from Summit through its challenges. Especially builds like this, though, do require you to be, or well, they don't require you to be, but they prefer to be at SHE level 1000 or above, where you already have some of those bonuses. Because even there, we are, of course, making use of the skill damage, the skill haste and such, and also, yeah, the weapon side of things. And even, yeah, the Memento, once it's charged up, gives us a little bit of regen that will take a little bit care of our healing. Overall, these are recommended, but they're a specific playstyle. You have to kind of like that playstyle to go this route. But if you do, yeah, definitely give these a try, especially if you're someone that is into playing, for instance, a full turret drone. I would say, especially the CoCo one, though, would be a little bit higher recommended than Striker, but both of these can perform a lot better, especially in the hands of somebody that is decent at getting that gun singing. And going to 3.08, we have the sister build of the build we just saw a second ago. And this will actually happen with the CoCo one on Character 4 as well, where we're reusing some of the pieces as we saw from that TurDrone Hybrid next door in here. And that can actually be really nice because honestly, going from a TurDrone Hybrid or TurDro Hybrid to a combat medic, if the gear set at least kind of applies and can do both functions like Striker can and like CoCo can, having them side by side works out as we can reuse some of the pieces. But first, let's explain a combat medic. Combat medic is kind of going in that same idea that we had with the TurDro hybrids. We're taking the skill tiers, and those are going mostly towards our skills. And then we are taking the rest of the build, with the exception of here as well, the stats on the Btsu data glove. We can't change those, of course. But the rest of the build, the crit chances and the crit damages, they're all going towards the weapon. Here we're reusing the capacitor. We're wasting effectively that skill damage that it has. But here still the capacitor is the better pick, even best pick overall. No weapon, basically, even a Lexington with Killer actually doesn't, well, the Lexington with Killer would be ahead by just about 5% on this build when Killer is active. And when Killer isn't active, it would be about 20% behind. So it is very much a build that, yeah, because of consistency, we go with the capacitor, because I'd rather just have that consistency, and yet not having Killer up would not be an ender, especially as well on a build like this that isn't, while it can kill, it is not going to, you know, I'm not going to outkill, for instance, a full Striker alongside of me. As this is especially as well a group build again, because with most healers, yeah, you want to have that just to heal others, especially. If you want to heal yourself, there are other ways, especially, for instance, Memento and Regen and such, that can take care of that, or just medpacks. This is mostly then, yeah, to support a team, and especially combat medics and healers in general are really useful, especially when seasons of no regen is around, because, yeah, if we don't have that out of combat regen healing us, it's nice to have some healing there. And this has some healing. This doesn't have the healing of, for instance, a full-blooded healer, but then it's not trying to. Instead, it has a little bit of healing, and then it has a decent amount of damage on its weapon. It can hit decently hard, even, you know, while it does look with all of those yellow cores to be more towards being a skill build, actually its weapon side, because of the crit that we're keeping and the capacitor working really well to recoup some weapon damage, and then also its crit mods and stuff are pretty strong, it does decently well. But here, we still have enough, for instance, with the chem, as long as we especially hit them with that burst healing of the chem, to pull up a red build, basically in the hit, and then the one tick of the healing of the healing chem will be enough to bring them back up to full. We also have enough charges on our hive to, for instance, heal several reds back up to full without running out. And of course, if we run out, we can always overcharge as well. Again, we're going with that Btsu data glove for that same reasoning. We can use that to overcharge a team, and that is one of the strong things that this build can do. It can overcharge a team, reset all their hives, if nothing else. Of course, overcharge itself, but overcharge a team as well. Consider, for instance, alongside of it that, yeah, shields are now then invincible. Anybody with a shield for that 15 seconds that overcharges up can just rush at the enemy and just do perfectly fine. For instance, as well, if they're running smart cover, that will be overcharged. That can provide a really group bonus. Even them running just the pulse and pulsing while it is overcharged will apply a 15% debuff on the enemy for the duration of the overcharge. So all of that is really strong in a group setting, and this is, of course, giving up a little bit of its damage, but it's, yeah, providing that group utility and then providing its healing to the team. And because of those, I like these builds quite a lot, because in the end, also from a gameplay perspective, what I end up playing them as is I'm still shooting basically, or trying to at least, shooting just as much as any red build would, but alongside of them, I'm also playing a healer alongside of it, which is, from a just gameplay perspective, much more engaging than just playing a full healer where you don't have that much to do. You're just basically applying opportunistic onto enemies, but you're not sitting there actually playing, you know, aggressively and such. And this way as well, of course, for heroic, for instance, I feel full healers are a little bit overkill. This fits much better. If we could take it into the game, actually, we see that the save, as I have it here, is with a Ferocious Calm. That was also the item in the corner. And the Ferocious Calm can be a really good item, of course, to have alongside of it, because we have that perfect overwatch. We can, if we're sitting in cover, we can provide this to the entire team as an extra buff. But as you saw there, I had it actually as with the Equalizer, mostly because the Equalizer is actually much easier to use. I don't need to remember to sit in cover because I quite often forget. Because of that, it's usually better just for me to run this, get a little bit more damage for myself, and then we give up that little bit of bonus damage to the team, and that's kind of fine because I'll forget to sit in cover. But I want to have that option, so it is saved with that. And then, of course, this equalizer is saved with a ton of other builds anyway. So I always have that in this loadout. But this Ferocious Calm is just saved here, so I can put it into this build if I want to have that option. And yeah, Ferocious Calm, of course, pretty powerful tool. It is a DZ item, so mostly it is easiest if you, a bunch of named caches is mostly the way to get it. If you get one with either crit chance or crit damage, that's all you need because you can put the other stat next to it. The talent is, of course, fixed. In my case, I do have the blueprints. It is, of course, in the reconstructed caches blueprints pool. And because of that, I can just craft one for myself. This would be a harder piece to get, but yeah, also not the necessary piece. We could just go with the equalizer. For the rest of it, yeah, we have record again, some of these striker pieces as we have here. Here then we have also a backpack that we didn't have in the previous build because, of course, yeah, we're going to that Btsu where the Memento was there. But actually the other three pieces, as we can see here in the loadouts, they're both in the TurDro striker and also in the combat medic striker. So I'm reusing three of those pieces, which can be nice because that saves a little bit in their inventory. So yeah, those three pieces are going in between builds together with that capacitor and the technician as well, actually. And that can make it so that we're reusing some of those pieces. That can save a little bit. So if you make one of these, consider making the other one as well. You're pretty close to it anyway. You're basically one piece away. And yeah, the exotics that are pretty common to get. If we discuss how hard it is to get, yeah, those record pieces cost a little bit. We generally need to optimize for them as well. That Ferocious Calm can be harder to get, especially when starting out, but yeah, you don't need it, as you can see here. I'm mainly here showing it with the equalizer. Actually, on character 5, we'll see it be saved with the Ferocious Calm as just a variant. The rest of it is pretty easy to get together, and playstyle-wise, I enjoy these quite a lot. It does take a little bit to get that stacking going. Here again, though, I feel that actually CoCo is a little bit better of a fit for this style of build. That's why I am still keeping these. They are still pretty strong. And yeah, there are some places where this will do better than the CoCo variant. But I feel for general play, the CoCo variants that we'll see in a similar fashion, where it is also saved as sister builds next to each other's twinsies on character 4, they work really well now, especially the combat medic, because in here, if I'm needing to heal quite a bit, I'll lose a lot of stacks. On the CoCo, it's a little bit less so, and especially if we're using them in the group setting, CoCo will provide its stacks pretty decently consistently. So overall, a recommended build, especially for the kind of player that likes playing this style of build. I really enjoy these, and I pull them out quite often just to play their playstyle. I am trying to still shoot just as much as any red build would, but then alongside of that, I have an extra job. And that can actually almost be exhausting sometimes. In no regen seasons as well, this has a lot of value, but in Summit, for instance, we can just have this on, and especially, yeah, hard to earn, no regen and such we can take without really it costing us much. The only downside is, especially in seasons with no fragile armor, which we have now, if people get broken and they don't fix it up, there is not much to heal there, of course. So yeah, in those seasons, it's a little less effective. Overall, for the right kind of player, if you're, for instance, running a full healer, do consider making one of this or maybe the CoCo variant, as yeah, I enjoy them quite a lot. As we come to 3.09, this is HeadHuntersFury with Headhunter, which we usually abbreviate to HeadHuntersFury, combining the hunter into both of them effectively. And HeadHuntersFuries are go-tos for especially pistols and also rifles to take and be short-range headhunters. You need to effectively work using that bonuses of HeadHuntersFury for when they get close to the enemy, that 20% amplified damage that it has. We're taking that and we're trying to apply it not so much to the weapons it is bonused with a shotgun and, for instance, the SMG. We do have a shotgun here, but honestly, the main tools of this build for its headhunting part is going to be the Harvest or Regulus, and then together with that an 1886 as we have here. Sometimes we can take shotguns as well, and they work very well here. Now, there is, of course, already the piece there that most people that know the build collection or know me might go like, wait, why is there a ninja bike there? The reason is there are some places where the ninja bike is okay enough. This is not, I would say, the best HeadHuntersFury. That distinction, to me, would definitely go to just the pure-blooded one with DNH and DNH and Chain Killer, a DNH backpack with Vigilance, a Chain Killer, as we saw already on Character 1 with just 4 pieces of HeadHuntersFury, or taking the Memento with it. But this as a different variant that can do a little bit different things as well is actually a nice enough one to have. Unlike the Memento one, we can take this to, for instance, safe houses and such without losing all of the stacks that the Memento would have. And especially, of course, if we're using this to, for instance, go and do activities and such, that can be nice. That opens up a lot more positions that we can go. Then damage-wise, it actually keeps up with, for instance, a Memento variant of the HeadHuntersFury. It doesn't exceed it because, yeah, especially when that Memento one is charged up, of course, as well, alongside of it, we're even getting things like, for instance, having that regen of the Memento. But especially because we have 2-piece Imminence armaments available that can become a 3-piece Imminence armaments, that gives us 60% pistol, that really does open up, for instance, here to make this choice. This is then again as well one of 2 Ninja Bike builds in the build collection, and both are Headhunters. And yeah, there's a good reason for that as well, because yeah, with headhunting, we can just take 1 stat. We don't need crit chance, crit damage. And then as well, giving up vigilance hurts, but it isn't the end of the world, especially because we can make use, for instance, of the blue and that yellow. Here as well, even I can see that I have Technician there giving us a 3-tier shield, and we're making use at least of those tiers effectively. If we take it into the game, we see that it is saved as shown there. And here though, I am actually not with an 1886 here, but that doesn't per se make it too big of a difference, as yeah, we either often have one available on the character, which I don't have here. I think I moved it to a different build for the time being, and actually I'm farming up for one again. But also White Death can work out well enough. This weapon is basically not my main choice. I'm mostly going with the pistol on this one, especially, of course, because we're feeding so much into it with those 2 pieces of Imminence armaments becoming 3 pieces. Then, of course, on this character, yeah, I do also have a Regulus, I have the Harvest, and I can swap as need be. Each kind of fits a different position, especially, of course, yeah, Determined makes it so easy and we can just burn through things. But the Regulus has its own room clearing or spawn clearing capabilities that nothing matches up with. Of note here as well, I'll say again that, yeah, quite often on the characters, I don't have the graded weapons. So, for instance, on there, we see a graded grade 30 Regulus, a grade 30 Harvest on the build picture and such, and other high-grade weapons. I'm mostly, on my main account at least, all my high-grade weapons live in my stash mostly. It isn't that they stay in there. If I really want to, you know, mess around, or I'm really going to go farm for an hour or 2 on some build, I might grab those pieces, or if we're going to go do a master mission or something, or legendary, I'll go and grab them, definitely. But because I have 4 characters and I use all 4 characters actually, yeah, I don't have the resources to make, you know, 4 Reguluses, grade 30 and such. Overall though, this is a decent setup for HeadHuntersFury. Again, I would not say it's the top pick, but as we've seen already with the build collection, I'm perfectly fine with having basically the second pick there as well, if it has something unique to it. And the unique thing about this one is, yeah, we can go to safe houses and control points, where the Memento one, we would give up all of our stacks. Because of that, as well, we can die more easily with, for instance, resetting sometimes. With some things, it is actually handy to have that as an option to basically be able to kind of end yourself and then respawn somewhere close as a faster way of getting out of some fights and such. And with the Memento, of course, that would come at the cost of our backpack or the backpacks or the charges we have on that backpack. But yeah, here we don't have that issue. Overall, this is made possible mostly by Imminence armaments existing. Before this, this wasn't really an option. If we go back to the build picture, we see that it is 2 pieces of red Imminence armament, so we're just keeping it mostly red. Those HeadHuntersFury pieces we're also mostly keeping red, meaning that those are easy enough pieces to get, making this a build that you can put together pretty quick, especially if you already have a Ninja Bike. Otherwise, the Ninja Bike is available through Retaliation. It is in targeted pool as well, so you can just get it from targeted backpacks, but you can get the blueprint from Retaliation and then craft some. The Harvest is, of course, not always available. It is a seasonal item. The Regulus is, well, normally from Iron Horse, but for instance, if you are willing to play around these times, it is very much available through the Krampus event. The Krampus event has given us, effectively, most people that want it, the ability to get an Eagle Bearer and an Oreo, but also the Regulus here. It hasn't given out the Ravenous or the Bighorn with this one, but I would expect actually high drop rate events to come by more often as we go forward. And I feel that devs have kind of given up on keeping these exclusive, devaluing them a little, but making them available to everybody. To me, honestly, I'm perfectly on board for that, because the Regulus opens up a lot of doors, and having that option to a lot more people, honestly, I'm all in favor of it. Specialization-wise, we can go several options. We have Firewall here just for the tier, an extra tier on that shield, and we can actually make that shield pretty chunky. Because of that, we can just hide behind it and, yeah, either headhunt with the Regulus or just get more easy determined shots out. Otherwise, yeah, you can take Firewall, especially for that shield that it has, the Striker Shield, which is a damage-dealing shield that we can equip from Firewall. It isn't the Striker set. And otherwise, of course, Sharpshooter just for the handling bonuses that it has. And of course, as well, the drone that it has, the spotting drone, is really strong. Overall, this is not the hardest one of the headhunters to get together, so especially if you already have a Ninja bike lying around, this is one to consider. It can start, yeah, definitely on a red, and then the second shot can already be an elite, for instance, and that's more than enough firepower than we need. It doesn't per se open up any new ways of playing the HeadHuntersFury, but the advantages that it has over, for instance, the Momentum one in going everywhere, that does make a difference. As we come to 3.10, and on this one we have Umbra Initiative. We're showing it here with the Overdogs, but Umbra, as with most red builds, is capable of running in multiple ways. As what you definitely want on Umbra's Initiative is to take the chest. The chest is a really good piece, and that also, of course, opens up the possibility of some of those exotics, but it also effectively beats out most other choices we could even put here. Overall, I generally don't take the backpack. The backpack helps with some healing and such, but that healing of this isn't that strong to begin with, especially if we don't have some armor cores to go with it, and here we're really setting it up to do some damage. Umbra is actually one of the better red builds. It is very competitive. It definitely is, for instance, ahead of things like Aces and 8 and Breaking Point, and even, for instance, Ongoing Directive. It is about 10% or such, depending on layout, but for instance, in Overdogs variant like we have here with Vigilance versus the Obliterate on an Obliterate Striker versus that Vigilance, it is about 90% of the way there. It is a little bit under the 90% mark. And that is, of course, at its max stacks. The thing with Umbra is as well, it stacks differently than most of the other builds. Most of the other builds, we shoot things to kind of stack up. Here, when we go into cover, we'll build up the charge effectively. When we pull out of cover, then we basically have our stacks up. If we have charged up for 5 seconds, we'll be at full 100 stacks with the chest. And then we start losing stacks per second. And until we lose either all of it, or if you go back into cover to kind of charge it back up. So the play style of it becomes you go into cover, you build up, you do ambush tactics effectively. You wanna be in control of the fights, where you go into cover, then you pop out, shoot a few enemies, kill them, go back into cover, charge up a little bit. Even in that going back into cover, there's a mechanic there where when we are in combat, when we are out of cover, we build up another stacking mechanic that when we go into cover, heals us up a little bit. Without the backpack, it is only a little bit, but that's kind of fine. We're not setting it up here for that healing prowess that it can kind of have. We are showing it here with ARs, but Umbra actually works with basically any weapon. That's also why I have a secondary rifle, and this could be actually one of the better rifle builds. Considering, for instance, CoCo, Concentrated Company, that can make for a decent or pretty good rifle build, but mostly more if you're using it in groups. I've been enjoying Concentrated Company a lot with rifles and basically any weapon types going, and Umbra is kind of the same. But then here, yeah, this doesn't, for instance, need to be in a group the way that CoCo does. So, for instance, in solo play, this is actually one of the recommended ways. If there are a lot of people that do like rifles, and I can understand, they do have a little bit different playstyle from the rest, so it is enjoyable just to mess around with them and try to get them on target and control them. Overall, Negotiator and Umbra would be actually the picks for like solo play. And nowadays, I would definitely say in group settings, CoCo is kind of the way to go. But Umbra works for any weapon type. This could be an LMG, this could be an SMG. You would want some range because, yeah, you can't be in cover, for instance, but that's kind of fine. The thing that you need to learn to use with Umbra is especially tall cover. You basically go into cover, but you then, of course, need to be out of the cover system. That doesn't mean you have to be out in the open. You can just be standing behind tall cover, which is the thing that I would recommend already. If we take it to the in-game as we have it here, you will see actually that, as with most red builds, as we've discussed several times already, I'm saving it as a 5-piece, again, giving myself all of the options. So when I load this build up, and then we go to it, again, set it up with that overdogs that we saw a second ago there. We can stick that in, making it the overdogs version. But also, again, I can take a Coyote, I can take a Tinkerer, I could even take a Centurion, and basically anything else. Exodus could be an option as well. Nimble could be an option. Even Bloody Knuckles or such could be an option. Of course, if we are going Tinkerer, we are going with different weapons here because I would want to match up with ARs or 2 rifles. Here as well, the reason that it's also saved with that FAMAS instead of the Lexington, that Lexington is of course already saved with a different build, or several different builds that I have already. Because of that, I'm saving in FAMAS here, just so I have this weapon both for Tinkerer here or Tinkerer other places. Generally, I would pick the Lexington over the FAMAS for just general play. And here also, yeah, we are taking Cheska as the backpack, and especially as well because I want to have that option to have multiple weapon types on here. Nowadays, with grade 30 as well, for instance, taking Fenris here would be a tiny benefit. Unit alloys, actually, to point that out, doesn't work well here. The rate of fire bonus of there, this feeds into rate of fire and crit damage as a gear set. That is where its damage bonuses come from. Unit alloys actually is much smaller than Cheska here. The specific weapon damage, for instance, taking Petrov with LMG or Fenris with AR, is a tiny bit more at max stacks, but I prefer to have that Cheska for its universality. That will work with if I want to run this with LMGs, ARs, rifles, SMGs, hell, if I even put a marksman rifle on it, it'll work out. Because of that, there is some reasons to have that. And if I really want to min-max that, I always have a Fenris backpack in the, in the stash that I can go and grab, of course. Going back to its build picture, we have, of course, a red gear set here that we're just keeping red stats underneath with some red mods. Overall, not hard to get. The weapons, we have a lot of choices, so we can go with many a different weapon. Whatever you get, you can kind of stick in here. This can work also with a lot of the exotics, just making sure that, yeah, your crit chance, crit damages are kind of set up correctly. We can take Overdogs, we can take Tinkerer, we can take Coyote or Centurion, and yeah, having any of them can work in here. What we can do as well is if we are going with an AR, we could go 2-piece unit. That would still be okay because of that second piece unit that is 20% AR. But also, yeah, sticking a Grupo piece in here or just some other high-end could work out. Generally, you would want to keep the chest. So yeah, Equalizer or something does not work out too well here. And talent-wise, yeah, anything can kind of work as we go with it here. On the backpack as well, if you don't want Vigilance, Bloodsucker and such is an option, but so is Unstoppable Force. That would be my other go-to for this. Especially Unstoppable Force does work decently well, because when we have Umbra, we at least have upfront damage. It always, Unstoppable Force, for instance, on Striker always feels a little weak because we don't have the stacks up on Striker yet, and we don't have that damage from Vigilance that we would normally have. Here at least, we're starting on high damage on the gear set. Hopefully we're getting kills, so then Unstoppable Force will start coming in, and then when we get a little bit lower in the stacks, the Unstoppable Force will be up, and then it doesn't feel as bad. We have at least that upfront damage to get some quick 2-3 red kills maybe, just to get it going. So Unstoppable Force is definitely an option here as well. Overall, a well worth build taking, and as you saw as well already on Character 1, for instance, or well, on Character 2 actually, we even have variants of this going into, for instance, combat medic and such. Umbra, I feel, is definitely one of the top sets in the game. It is, in my opinion, a little bit behind Tipping Skills, a little bit behind CoCo, definitely behind Strikers, especially the chest strikers, of course. But that doesn't make it bad. It is definitely competitive and can be used, and it has a different playstyle, which is what I enjoy a lot. And on 311, we see Red FI. This is a buff build, as of course, Future Initiative, the healing gear set that it is has a bonus to total weapon damage that it can provide to the team that is contingent on each team member keeping up their armor. It is not based on the player themselves having their armor up, but every player separately, when they are at full armor and in the group with an FI, they will get that buff. Just point that out, as sometimes there's some confusion about how that exactly works, even though it should be very clear, honestly. But yeah, this then actually provides that bonus without being a healer fully, because of course, combining that with a normal healing FI, they can also heal you. So if you get hit, your armor is gone, you don't have the bonus, oh, they heal you, and then you get back up again. Here though, this is a different philosophy. We're trying to keep this build's damage up as we go with some crit chances and crit damages, capacitor, and yeah, for instance as well, vigilance backpack here, even though we're giving up a little bit of it here with the Btsu data glove damage wise, but that's kind of worth it from a mechanic that we'll discuss in a second. I do have also other variants of this that are more set up as well, actually with a Coyote, for instance, but you could take an Overdogs or a Tinkerer as well for taking more damage on. Now, here with this Red FI, of course, yeah, we're not healing that much with those skills. It is still enough to keep people topped off, but the expectation is more, for instance, when running this in Countdown and such, when people get really hit, if it's not just a little bit of hit, but just they really lost all of their armor, it's an expectation that they will just heal themselves up. They will use an armor pack, and because of that, they'll be back at full armor. And this is just to kind of heal them that little bit of chip damage and stuff going around. We can heal those up with our healing cam and our healing hive. Then here with the Btsu, as we've discussed many times already, the Btsu data gloves, especially with their supercharge, overcharging the entire team, they can be really strong. In this case, though, we can't do that supercharge. When we overcharge here, when we deconstruct the hive, it becomes a supercharge. It applies to the entirety of the team when we are at skill tier 6. But here, of course, we're only 2 skill tiers. We have one from Technician, we have one from this Btsu data glove. But there is a way of going about getting that to go, because when we are overcharged, when we deconstruct our hive, we will be overcharged just as at that point for the 15 seconds that the overcharge is active from the Btsu data glove. At that stage, we are considered as skill tier 6. When you are overcharged from most sources, you are considered as skill tier 6. So in that time, we are skill tier 6 for the effects of this. So if we throw out a second hive and then deconstruct that, that will be a supercharge. That will apply to the entire team, overcharging the entirety of the team. And as we've discussed, that is really strong because also it resets all of their skills, including if multiple hives were lost, revive hives were lost on some of the red players in, let's say, Countdown or such. You give that all back to all those players, especially just before, for instance, because while that does take some time, you could do that, for instance, just before extraction. Any hives lost before the end fight are all back, of course. And of course, if you kind of time it right so that they then can use their shields, for instance, that are invincible while they're overcharged against the hunters, or for instance, using a pulse to kind of the overcharge pulse will apply debuff on all the enemies that it is pulsing. So for instance, those kind of things can be really strong. Here though, we're kind of making it a little bit clunkier than it would be for some with some other builds, but then we're keeping our own damage up. Here the capacitor is still the top pick damage wise, even with these 2 tiers. And Lexington, for instance, with Killer is a little bit ahead when it gets a kill, but this isn't the build to get all of the kills, basically. When we are competing with, let's say, Strikers, CoCos, Umbras, Negotiators, and stuff around us, we're not going to get too many kills going. Because of that, yeah, I lean more towards the capacitor, which is a little bit ahead than a measured weapon, even with just these 2 skill tiers. Then we are going here with Cheska. Unit Alloy actually here is about the same output. Here I'm sticking with Cheska just to not change up the build, but Unit Alloy is an option here as well. It ends up around the same number. You gain a little bit on the burst DPS, you lose a little bit on the sustained DPS, And honestly, I could make a case either way, but I've stuck here with the chest guard that was already on here. We are going with Vigilance. Another option that we would have is Safeguard. Safeguard, when we are at full armor, it increases our healing output. Our repair skill goes up by 130. That can actually make it so that as long as we are at full armor, we can actually decently heal. But I like having that Vigilance for that little bit of extra damage. We could, of course, also go with things like Hermano or such for a little bit bonuses there. But here I'm still trying to keep its own damage up. If we take it into the game, we see that it is actually saved as a 5-piece here in its loadout slot. And that is, again, as we discussed, we can take some options. Generally, I do want to keep the chest, but even the chest is not holy. One thing we can take there is actually what the chest that we saw with the combat medic. We could take this Ferocious Calm, which would slot in there as well. And then we could have actually a little bit more total weapon damage than just the FI, because the FI without the chest is 15, with the chest is 25. If we aren't taking its chest, but we're taking this, we instead are 15 plus 14. It is the same pool, so they do add together. This is all total weapon damage. But then, of course, I do need to be in cover and actually provide that bonus through this. I find it overall easier to just keep that chest, and then also we open up, because we don't want to take the backpack generally. That opens up all of the exotic options that we have, especially Btsu, of course, a go-to. But if we wanted to, for instance, go more for damage and such, yeah, Overdogs, Tinkerer, or Coyote could be good on here. Overall, I feel this is a good spot as well for a Coyote, because actually, if, for instance, this build takes the Coyote in a countdown, it loses overall as a team. We lose less than, for instance, if one of the Strikers were to take it, and then this takes an Overdogs. If the Striker can take the Overdogs, they already do more damage. Them doing even more damage, 30% more damage on them is much more than in absolute numbers than on this build, of course. But overall, this is kind of a setup to buff allies while keeping its own damage, so it can, for instance, take a position. And yeah, overall, a decently enjoyable build. If we go back to its build picture to discuss how hard it is to get, this is one of the harder builds to put together. All of these will come, of course, with all of them will come with yellow cores. Because of that, the stat underneath it, most of the time when they drop, is actually yellow stats. So trying to find some crit chance, crit damage ones can take some while. But yeah, you can get some together overall as well. You don't need, of course, the position of these crit chances and crit damages isn't per se, you don't have to rigidly follow them as they are here. Meaning that, yeah, if you get, for instance, a crit chance piece here and a crit damage piece here, that'll still work out. Overall, though, it is handy to, for instance, have the chest, the holster, and the knee pad have the same kind of layout of stats, at least, or the same amount of stats, because especially on the mask and the glove, what we have there is, of course, there we're swapping some pieces in. We want it to be set up in a way where, yeah, we can just slot in a Tinkerer and it works. We can slot in an Overdogs and it works. Although here it's mostly set up to stick in this Btsu data glove and it works. In the case of the Overdogs, when it comes in, because yeah, it, for instance, brings in a crit chance mod or a crit chance attribute with it, of course, then we would go to 58. Here as well, it's kind of set up to be expecting a Coyote alongside of it. Overall, a build that I quite enjoy, especially for countdown. This can be a potent tool. Overall, I would pick an ongoing directive first as a buffing build, especially for instance for countdown where a lot of kills happen. But for other places, there are a lot of other fights where not that many kills happen, and ongoing directives loses a little bit of its potency as a buffing build, and this can be the stand-in there. Especially in raids and such, it actually isn't too bad to have one player, especially in dark hours, for instance, one player running a build like this. Because when generally in there we don't have any healers, this can at least, for instance, provide a reset on the hives once per 2 minutes. And then it has enough damage to, for instance, hold the position, especially if we're thinking about Razorback. If we have a player there that doesn't have any damage at all, for instance, with a full healer, it all comes down to the other player doing all of the damage. This can kill for itself if it needs to. It's not the best, of course. It's not going to do as much damage as other things, but along the way, it's buffing. I do enjoy these. They're a little bit harder to get together, but well worth considering. And on 312, we see HeadHuntersFury. This is one of the quintessential run and gun builds of the game. It was introduced a long time ago. It is from one of the early seasons of the game in year 2, and a very potent gear set. On the damage end, it doesn't keep up actually on a lot of other builds, but especially solo, it works out really well because it has a lot of traits that work there. It has an armor on kill bonus, it has a disorient on kill on nearby enemies that die nearby that. You do want to close the distance. It is definitely based on getting proximity to the enemy. Being within 15 meters applies the mark, the hunter's mark on them. And if you kill them, then that's well, you get bonus damage against them. And then also when you kill them, then you get the bonuses, the disorients and such happening. It also has a stacking kill buff that works out decently well, but it's pretty short. It is also one of the, trivia-wise, one of the only 2 multiplicatives in the game, the true multiplicatives, where it is multiplicative to itself. But that is only for that stacking buff, that 5 kills that you get. That 5% actually multiplies against itself as well. Here we see it set up for SMG. That is one of the go-tos with it. It really works well with SMGs and shotguns as a kind of run and gun build. But then, of course, as we saw already twice in for HeadHuntersFuries, we can also use it for headhunting builds as well, where we try to get close and then use that as bonuses. They work really well with Headhunter, especially as well as on Headhunter, they kind of doubled it. Here, though, we're trying to just make it a run and gun build. We're going to close the distance to the enemy and then try to keep our vigilance up with our shield, hit them with our obliterate, and especially, of course, stack that up real quick with the SMG. From a damage perspective, Hunter's Furies don't have the damage of a Striker or an Umbra or such, but they don't per se need to either, because they have an armor on kill that makes it so that we're healing ourselves back up, and then also they have the Disorient on kill, which, yeah, will make it so that enemies are, you know, a lot less dangerous. That is the main reason they are actually very effective. From a damage perspective, they aren't all the way up there in comparison. But they make for a really good well, run and gun build, especially as well, as they don't need that stacking. From the first moments, they do have their damage already, as long as you get close to the enemy. Here, I'm setting it up as an SMG variant, especially we're taking Sokolov plus the Equalizer. That turns out to be the better setup here. Even at grade 30, the Sokolov outperforms any other piece we could put here, like Cheska or Grupo. And then, yeah, the Equalizer is our go-to, of course, if we're going Obliterate. And this is definitely a place to stick Obliterate in there. One of the choices we can make as well, we'll see or actually we won't see in variant later, because I did take that out, but there is, for instance, in the build collection, there are folders for Hunter's Fury, for Strikers, for Negotiator, where we have different variations. Memento is definitely one to consider. We can stick a Memento in here. Here I have 2 blue cores. Generally, I want just 2 tiers for the shield. The Memento would provide that already. So if I'm taking the Memento, we would just take the Memento in here. The Equalizer basically moves out. We just have a crit chance mod in there, and that would land on the same crit chances as this Sokolov backpack would. And then we have, generally I would swap these 2 cores, then also to red, and then I have a 2-tier shield still, and then we have the bonuses of the Memento. And as we discussed, Hunter's Fury, especially solo, works really well. It has several of its components, the armor on kill and such, the disorient on kill, those are all on kills and only dependent on us. So we, you know, it's definitely a build that either in small groups, 2-man, 3-man, that's where I would take it, or just solo. If we take it into the game, we actually have it saved mostly as is there, except for the weapons, because yeah, here I'm actually taking a different weapon. I just want to have an SMG9 available to this character as well, so we're taking that there. But of course, I do have, actually, this is kind of my SMG character, so they do have effectively all of the SMGs. I believe that is actually all of them, right? Yes. So they have all of the SMGs available to them, all of the exotics. Chatterbox is a really good pick. This would also be the build to stick an Ouroboros in if you want to try it out. Either Strikers or this would be the place I would stick the Ouroboros. And overall, yeah, Hunter's Fury, I like it a lot. It is very much a run and gun build. If you have that playstyle in you, this was before tech tanks and such even existed, my go-to for that kind of aggressive playstyle, but you have to play it aggressive. You have to close that distance. If you're not within 15 meters, it feels very awkward. Then there's also the thing that in some missions and such, you can't get close enough. famously, there are several places where we're fighting from one elevated position to another, just from a balcony or such, from one balcony to another. Bank is a place, Grand Washington is a place where we can't get close enough to the enemy. And then, yeah, it kind of feels painful and weak. But in the open world, for instance, with activities, it can work out if you close the distance. But yeah, Summit is really one of the places I really still like this style of build. We are taking Firewall here. Specialization-wise, we can go with anything really, but Firewall works really well with any build that gets close, because we also are taking that Striker Shield, which is the name of this ballistic shield from Firewall. And yeah, that has a damage component to it. And that damage component is contingent on the cone in front of us, and that is actually per enemy. So especially if you have multiple enemies in front of us in a short distance, say they just spawned from a door, yeah, this bonus can get really high, and you can get a very quick kill. And of course, if they're all together in a doorway, now they're getting disoriented from the talent here, and then you can just feast on them from there on. So yeah, those ways are definitely the ways to kind of use this. As we discussed as well, I just always do have a memento in here, and actually I have multiple mementos, as you can see here, one with headshot mod there and one with crit chance, just so I don't even have to swap out that mod. Just that would take more time. I'd rather have two of them in here. That way we're taking it to the memento version. I would generally then, yeah, swap these two pieces to not be armor cores, because 4 armor cores would be costing us a little bit too much. 2 is enough for me. You can play around with the cores as well. And that's also, as you can see here, the way that it is, that my pieces are farmed up. I have the stats effectively, and the core is the part that I've here, well, kept red, because yeah, they come with red cores, but I've recalibrated that part so I can make it even more blue if I wanted to, or for instance, less blue if I wanted to. And that is the recommended thing to do with some of these builds as well, is just to give yourself the option, especially if you get some pieces that are maxed out in crit chance or crit damage, stick them in here, and then, for instance, yeah, make it so that you can play with that core. Going back to the build picture, we see that, yeah, it is definitely one of the easier builds as well to put together. It is just HeadHuntersFury pieces. They come with a weapons core. Now, yeah, if we want to take these 2 blue cores, then what we do want is, yeah, pieces that have crit chance or crit damage. That would cost a little bit, but you could make the full red version of it and just play around with it like that, or yeah, just stick in a memento, for instance. All of those work really well with HeadHuntersFury, and it's one that you can kind of variant in multiple ways, because you can also go for Intimidate actually on the chest. If we are going Intimidate, then we are actually taking Cheska again, or Grupo. In this case, I believe it is actually Grupo that we take. But then, yeah, we are taking Equalizer unit alloys, at least, that rate of fire bonus. That here we're especially taking that because of the Equalizer and its perfect obliterate. The second, we're going with different talents, because you could even make it, for instance, with Spotter, or even with Glass if you wanted to. But then, yeah, for Glass we would take Sacrifice. For anything Intimidate or Spotter, we would take Cheska or Grupo. Overall, a pretty easy build to get together, especially as you can just pair it with any SMG that you can get. Of note, I'll point out here as well, nowadays, yeah, there are some links in that upper right corner. You can link through, well, back to the build collection, but also especially to point out the recommended weapons list. And yeah, in that recommended weapon list, I point out to a lot of, well, recommended weapons. So yeah, you can, if you, for instance, don't have this one, well, we have a few other recommendations here, but you could look into the recommended weapons list, especially as well as we have some talent picks there. And then you can see what you could take instead as well. Overall, a very versatile build, very easy to put together, and one that, yeah, for instance, in the past, every character of mine used to have. Nowadays, I don't have that many of them anymore, but we definitely still have a SMG version and a shotgun version on main account, and I enjoy them quite often, especially in this kind of shooty variant that we have here. And with 3.13, we come to an hazard-protected striker, especially. That is then also running the Backfire. A lot of people see this as a Backfire build. It kind of is, of course, as well. It is set up to be 100% bleed resistant, but also it is more set up for me, at least for my purposes, to be 90% generally hazard protected. And because of that, it can deal, for instance, with special ammo a lot more easily, especially if we're going against, let's say, Rikers or True Sons. I'm already completely resistant to their bleed rounds. They still hurt, of course. They are still shooting me, but they don't bleed me. And also, if we are going up against Cleaners or Outcasts, I could augment this to have, for instance, one more fire resistance mod alongside of it to prevent that. Although at 90% hazard resistance, most status effects will only apply to this build for a little second and then they'll go away, usually even less than a full second. Overall though, as I'll have to always preface this kind of, is that yeah, while the Backfire doesn't per se need its dedicated build, you can definitely just run Backfire on a full red striker. It's bleeding nowadays. It used to be 100% of your armor. Even at full stacks, it is nowadays 50% of your armor. The bleeding as well isn't as strong because it has diminishing returns. That diminishing returns effect that we have on status effect is actually applying to this when it applies to you. So you'll also only bleed 3 times and then you'll be immune for a while. Also, once you reach 100 stacks, you won't bleed anymore from it. I'm well aware of all those things. This isn't the build, like this isn't set up in that way for that. Because also, I wouldn't ever want to bleed if I want to use the Backfire. It is a very strong tool, but it's not worth the bleeding at all for even a little bit. Now, of course, with the season, we also have a modifier that can give us some hazard protection. In that case, what we can take is actually, I can take the red pieces that I have on my strikers, and we can just have some pieces here come in with a little bit more crit damage or weapon handling, because already the crit damage is going to be saturated quite a lot with that Backfire. So there are ways of altering this, for instance, for this season. But my general use for this build is, yeah, to have a high hazard protected build to take into places where that is necessary. And that can help out, for instance, in the early, the first modifier that we got. If you, with one of the hostile modifiers, if you shot them in the wrong range, you would get shocked. One shock mod here prevented that, and this became one of my go-to builds for that time. Also, for some seasons, we've had augmentation of crit chance, for instance, crit chance being a little bit higher. Then things like Negotiator and Backfire definitely work out. As we already kind of went on that rant with the Unit Alloys video. Yeah, this isn't the Backfire season. The season that we had the Backfire be very prominent, and I actually agreed with that because we had a modifier that could provide us 10 crit chance just generally, or it could take us crit chance to 100%. Weapons like the Backfire that are crit damage related and Negotiators, for instance, that is crit related, for instance, they really were powerful that season. This season, we don't have any crit chance. It's just the hazard protection. That doesn't make any real difference to this build, really. Even if you take that extra 48 onto crit damage, because we're pushing it so high, we're only getting like 10% more out of the build. That's still less than just running a red striker with Lexington and Killer. Not at full stacks, but at around 50 stacks or around 60 stacks, this kind of starts to exceed that. So it would need to be generally above 60 stacks for that to be worth it. But then the real benefit here to me, and that's also why I'm presenting it as a hazard protected striker, is really that hazard protection. If we take it into the game, we see that it is actually saved exactly as there with the Backfire there as well. We of course can take an ACS to stack with. I'm actually using this place to stick a rock and roll in and just to have that for the places that makes sense. And then also actually I have the pieces, and that's just carried on the character to make this a chest striker variant. So I have a striker chest with hazard protection with the right mods, and then a replacement Cheska piece over here to make that a chest striker. That can actually be then actually really strong, of course, with this. We are still the same hazard protection effectively. That's also why the backpack is carrying the bleed mod, so that kind of works out in that way. In this way, yeah, it actually works out a little bit better at damage. Of course, when we are at full stacks, at the full 200, this can deal a decent amount of damage. But of course, getting to 200 stacks, especially when we're trying to also stack this, because we can't just ACS stacked and then have our damage here, we need to also get the Backfire through 100 stacks. Because of that, yeah, I don't end up running the chest striker variant much, but yeah, I do want to have that option available. So the pieces are there because, yeah, they are specific pieces that I need. But sometimes I do keep them in the stash if I need the inventory space. But this character is quite light nowadays in comparison, even though they are at 123. Overall, yeah, I generally will use this with Firewall for a close range build that it kind of is with that Striker Shield. We could, of course, also go for a few more blue cores, for instance. I don't believe I have any pieces that are set up in that way. Actually, yeah, we could take a blue core extra here as I have it. And as actually we looked into it with Unit Alloy's video, this is one of those places where taking the two-piece Cheska, we're taking the Cheska Obliterate here, just for its hazard protections here. We can actually take Equalizer, and then instead of this Cheska piece, we can take Yao. That gives us only 10% hazard protection, of course, and we can take another 10% just on a mod. Taking that option, though, it does actually do more damage than this one, but it eats into the general hazard protection. I like having that general hazard protection be at 90. Without that, I wouldn't use this build really at all. If we're dropping it to 80, I'm already going to feel the sting of some of the fires and shocks that may go around, and I just don't want that. This is mostly, again, a build to be hazard protected. Also, by taking the Cheska as we are here, when we go to a Chest Striker variant, it still works out as well. But definitely, yeah, we could consider that if we only want to really consider it as a backfire build. We could take the Equalizer. It is a tiny difference in damage, around the percent at full stacks, but then you also actually even lose a little bit on the sustained DPS because of that RPM bonus that you get there. Overall, this is not per se too hard of a build to get together because, yeah, we are just thinking we are keeping the red cores on the striker, so getting some of those pieces with max weapon damage, we can just put the hazard protection alongside of it. The Cheska pieces, yeah, they sometimes can take a little bit to get, especially, you know, if we're looking for specific a chest like this that then also has that we can then free talent, because I've optimized these so I can free talent it. Taking an Equalizer might be cheaper in that way because, yeah, that would at least have the talent be fixed. So if you get a hazard protection, protection stat on an Equalizer, you might consider that. You could put crit damage alongside of it and then keep the core. But then, yeah, as well, the Backfire is generally available. It is in the general target loot, so that's easy enough to get. And overall, a build that I do consider and I grab sometimes, but mostly more, again, just for that hazard protection. Backfire, I do end up using quite often, actually, for incursions and such. If we are incursion, I end up using the Backfire, especially there because we have a healer alongside of us. And yeah, its damage to me isn't that big. The healer will prevent a lot of it, but also we're going to get hazard protection from the healing from the healer. So overall, in, for instance, those kind of situations, the Backfire just gets used with a full red striker. This dedicated build is much more, yeah, as a hazard protected build, and then you might as well put Backfire on it. Overall, not the highest recommendations. For some seasons it can work out, especially if we get another season that feeds into crit chance. The Backfire is then a decent choice for that. Overall, kind of a B tier build, but one that I do find myself using from time to time. 314 next. And this is the Striker TechTank. We've already, with some of the other tech tanks, kind of discussed that. I like the Striker and Heartbreaker ones more in a lot of other ones. We've said that sentence. So we finally arrived at one of the Striker tech tanks here. The tech tank layout, for those maybe unfamiliar with it, is especially we are taking Technician, that's the tank, the tech in it. We are taking a Crusader Shield, that's the tank part of it. And to make that tank part happen, what we have is actually the Artificer Hive, as we have it there. And we are then also feeding into those with the Memento. And that's kind of the layout that I like for that. We're taking enough blue cores with it to make that a 6-tier shield. So generally, yeah, we have enough blue cores as we have them here. And that makes it the 6-tier shield being healed by a 2-tier Artificer. That's the tech tankiness of it. This Artificer heals it even if it's just on your back. So every 10 seconds, it just sends a charge, and that will, once the Memento here is charged up, it will heal this 6 million plus that this shield is at once the Memento is charged, because that skill efficiency of it will feed into the skill health, and yeah, that affects, of course, the shield. And then, yeah, it's getting healed for 42%. That means that we're gaining more than 2 million per 10 seconds, making it around the 200k, more than 200k regen per second. That's, of course, way more than any regen build, so armor regen builds could really reach, and that's kind of why it's my go-to for that. That makes for a strong shield, and then the rest of it feeds into some damage. So we're either taking some of the gear sets. We've already seen Negotiator and Umbra show up, and even CoCo we haven't seen show up yet. That's the next one. But yeah, we've seen already several gear sets show up there. And then, of course, yeah, we're either pairing it with the chest, if the chest is good with the gear set, or, for instance, here with the equalizer. And we're just laying the rest of the build towards the damage of the weapon. And that makes it so that these hit decently hard, and that's because of that, they are my go-tos, especially solo. Once we charge up the memento a little bit, these work really well. They have enough damage to do anything heroic. And yeah, they have more than enough survivability to be kind of stupid and get away with it. That's why I really do enjoy them. I get to be pretty aggressive with them. And yeah, they are my run and gun builds. The Striker one, as we've discussed, the Striker and the Heartbreaker are my preferred ones. The Striker one has a little bit more damage, especially because of its stacking being much better than the Heartbreaker. The Heartbreaker has a little bit more survivability because its stacking also provides bonus armor. And yeah, the Striker one is definitely one I've used a lot. This is one of likely my most used builds, especially nowadays as well, as we have a second variant of it. We'll see the full layout of it on Character 5, but here I do have the option to, for instance, take a DNH chest. It is in my stash, but we could even take just the equalizer. Take a Bulwark and take that Tempest. That's also why it is saved with the Tempest there, because otherwise we are using the Stack Broker or just an ACS and an AR here, the Lexington, of course. Stack Broker makes for really good stacking. The Lexington has really good damage. We're taking Killer alongside of it, even though we could, for instance, also go Measured and such for more consistency, but this can kill. If we take it into the game, it is saved as shown there, and then, yeah, actually the thing that we do, for instance, for the Tempest one is and that's actually how that other characters one is also set up, that they can go in between. And that's the nice thing with the Striker one nowadays, with the Tempest as well, if you have one, is that we can take an DNH chest. I don't have it in my inventory, but it's in my stash with Obliterate. That is the singular chest with Obliterate that beats Equalizer Outright. And that's, of course, because DNH pieces have 20% weapon damage. That does beat the rate of fire by so much that the Perfect actually doesn't catch up to the DNH chest. So it does prefer to have that DNH chest if we are using that Tempest. But honestly, I find myself quite often, just out of laziness, just changing out this shield, because when this shield becomes a Bulwark, then, of course, it is kind of set up to be the Striker Tempest TechTank. Because of that, yeah, I use it quite often like that. And the thing that the Tempest one, of course, offers us is that we can take 5 directives. The second we go with a pistol, we are dealing with the ammo directives outright, because pistols have infinite ammo. And yeah, Pistolero, as the name implies, does not do much against pistol builds. So yeah, that makes it so that for 5 directives is a really good pick, and my preferred one as well. We do also have the layout specifically for the Tempest, actually, on Character 5, and we'll see it later again as well. Going back to the Crusader, just for the AR style of this, yeah, it is a very potent build because it has more than enough damage to deal with most things, and that's kind of the idea behind it as well. All of the tech tanks are kind of set up with that idea in mind. We make a strong shield that is getting healed consistently, and then the rest goes into damage. Equalizer, of course, coming in is the go-to. We do want to have Obliterate is one of the better picks here. One thing we can do as well, and I have that option here set up as well, is that we go with a Striker chest, because of course we can go a chest Striker variant of this. Then what I'm taking actually is, well, we can take this unit alloys actually. Preferably we would have a Cheska piece. Oh, no, actually, no, that's why it's saved like this. Nowadays, it is a unit alloys to be matching with that the other layout that we had, which I actually forgot a second ago. But yeah, that's why I have that unit alloys bastard, which is saved actually for a different build as well. It's getting used into that high-end AR one that we have. But of course, to have matching crit chances, we're just taking unit alloys. Preferably, it will be Cheska. We can lay out our crit chances and crit damages on the gear a little bit differently to make that work better, because overall, Cheska beats out unit alloys when it isn't the equalizer by a little bit. It's especially that perfect Obliterate on the equalizer that beats out Cheska. So Cheska would be by a light margin preferred, but this will work out well enough. And this way we can have a chest Striker. Now, of course, if we then we would really need to stack with that ACS. That's also why I like the Obliterate variant perfectly fine, because with the Obliterate variant, especially with this, unlike with the Heartbreaker where we do really need to stack with that ACS, I don't really need to stack with that ACS. That's actually playstyle-wise one of the reasons I do like the Striker one as well. So, but we do have that option, and it's well worth considering and playing around with. And overall, yeah, these are really potent builds, and they are very high up in the recommended build list, and a lot of people that do try them out really do like them. Overall, though, you do want to have, the memento kind of charged up, but also because, for instance, the memento is feeding into all of the stats are kind of important, and that also means that we are making use of a lot of parts here from the watch. So especially on 0 watch points or not having spent anything into here, it's this build actually suffers more, for instance, than if we're just running a Red Striker. The Red Striker would only really be missing these red parts and then, the handling ones. But here we're also even making use of, for instance, the repair skill that we have here that feeds into the Artificer's healing abilities. And of course, the skill haste helps there a little bit as well. But we also want the tankiness from, for instance, having that total armor. So these kind of builds do like to be used a little bit later on, but that's also fine because putting these ones together, so for instance here with the Striker one, if we go back to its build picture as we have it here, we are recording several pieces, and that can make it a little bit expensive, especially for somebody freshly off the boat, freshly starting. Yeah, they wouldn't have a memento, and they also would not have a technician unlocked, of course. So for instance, because technician needs to be unlocked and a memento needs to be gotten, I'm not recommending this as like the top build in the recommended build list. We're just putting a normal Striker there because that's much more easily gotten. Because the pieces that we need here, they need to be here. If you try to, for instance, go without the memento, yeah, it's no longer really a tech tank, in my opinion. Same for not having technician there. Overall, these are highly recommended, and putting one together, especially for some solo play, for instance, on my when we started with my second account, very quickly I put together a tech tank there, although back in that is so long ago, that was the high-end tech tanks. When I got my third account kind of together, I put a Striker together first, then an Eclipse, and then a tech tank just for my solo play. These are my go-to solo builds, and they are very useful to have, especially now that we also can swap out to that Tempest variant. These have even gained in their popularity. Overall as well, with most seasons, for instance, this season, they can deal very well with 4 directives. As long as we're, for instance, not fighting Black Tusk with their disrupt rounds, they of course eat the shield. But if your shield is getting hit with bleed rounds and flame rounds, they don't really hurt you. And even the disorient rounds from the hyenas are annoying but not deadly. And then here as well, we do have with scavenge skills that we need to watch out with our shield, so we need to keep that up a little bit more, because every time you put it away, you need the scavenge skill to get it back. But actually cool skills, for instance, for seasons when we have that, it really doesn't do anything here, because the hive on your back doesn't really need to have charges to send the charge over when it is on your back. Because of that, cool skills basically does nothing to this build, and it's overall a free directive almost. And that way as well, they can deal with several directives, fragile armor and such. We can deal with. We don't really care, because we're not going to be armor broken much if we play it right. So overall, they are very strong builds, and they can deal with several directives, and then especially the Tempest one can even deal with all 5. And with 315, we get a new addition, one that a second ago I thought we had already covered, which is the CoCo TechTank, concentrated company in tech tank form. Because, of course, the second that we kind of saw CoCo, it was just like, oh, we're going to make it red. Definitely. A TurretDrone Hybrid makes sense. And Combat Medic definitely makes some sense as well. Wouldn't mind trying it out, for instance, with headhunting as well. But then, of course, the idea was also, oh, this might be a good tech tank as well. The thing is, though, that as we've kind of, discussed quite recently in the concentrated company video, CoCo works really well in groups, especially in groups. It can charge up really fast, get going, and then, it kind of stays up there quite strongly. Tech tanks, as I kind of discussed whenever we've touched on them so far, and also a second ago with the Striker, they're my go-to solo builds. How do we reconcile those two? We really don't. It doesn't work out well enough. You may have noticed already this build has been in the build collection for a little bit, but it hasn't made it onto the recommended build list. I will likely add it to there, but I'm actually considering just with the recommended build list to add some text basically to kind of explain some of the variants, because within a style, I'm not actually, we're not really talking of, there are now, for instance, two Heartbreaker tech tanks. I'm not really explaining what the difference between the two is. I wouldn't mind adding some text in that form, and then we might add the CoCo one in there, because this doesn't work out solo. Not at all. Even with the modifier on and having the companion, not even having a skill to help out with some stacking really feels painful. But we do sometimes, and I do sometimes, use tech tanks in a group setting, especially for instance, in a strong group already. I sometimes do take a Striker tech tank or Heartbreaker tech tank already, and then play it very aggressively and basically be a bruiser for the team. Just the guy in front dealing, being in the middle of things, kind of taking their attention. Even though tanking outright in Division isn't a very useful thing, because quite often the second the strikers, for instance, start shooting at an enemy, they'll take the aggro away from me because it's very much damage dependent. But these can still do decent damage that they can keep, for instance, in a bounty or such out in the open world. The named kind of focused on it, and yeah, that makes it so that other allies can, for instance, either clear out other things, or when they focus on that named, eventually it'll break off of me, but I'll at least have some time with it to kind of keep it off of them, for instance. So in Summit and in Open World, I do find myself sometimes using tech tanks, and they work decently well there already, and this then becomes a tech tank for those moments. That's also why it ended up now on the character that already has the Striker tech tank, a very competent solo tech tank, and then I can maybe use this for some group play. But overall, that is not really a place. For instance, in a group setting, I would find myself, for instance, leaning towards a combat medic, or maybe being OD, ongoing directive, to kind of buff the team. And this would be just a choice to kind of have that aggressive playstyle. It wouldn't be the best choice for the team. It would be more a choice for myself to go like, okay, I want to play aggressive, and I'll go and rush down the enemy and yeah, be in their faces, be the one taking the hits. Now, of course, this can't take that many hits, especially this shield is strong on the tech tanks. The build or the character behind it we aren't going all blue cores and such. Because of that, we do have some tankiness, but we're not super tanky in the way that, for instance, a 6 blue core build is. But that's also fine, because then, yeah, we are still trying to keep enemies to our front. I'll go find myself a corner to kind of put myself in close to the enemy, closer than my allies, and that will usually grab their aggro a little bit. I've been enjoying it a little bit in group settings. I've actually been really not enjoying it solo, so that's also why we're caveating it like this. Of note here, I am putting actually a Pestilence as a secondary. It still works out really well in here, because yeah, that weapon damage that we get, that works well with the Pestilence. But of course, we can't use the Pestilence with the shield. But then I'll use the Pestilence when I want to be in cover, or I've lost my shield, for instance. I'll swap to the Pestilence and kind of get some pesty ticks going like that. If we take it into the game, it is exactly saved as shown there, and yeah, it is the standard loadout. We don't want to be taking with CoCo, we don't want to take the chest. The backpack is good, but yeah, if we're going a tech tank, that memento is just too good. Especially with the tech tanks, yeah, we're making use of basically all parts of this buffalo, and yeah, we're taking the skill tier, or the skill efficiency, the armor regen, and the weapon damage from the long buffs. But even we're taking from, because yeah, we'll try to, on this build, definitely, I'll try to get close enough to the enemy and also pick up the short time buffs and get that extra weapon damage, that bonus armor that we have, and that extra skill efficiency even more so. And then here, yeah, the skill efficiency does feed into the repair that we have on the Artificer. It does help the shield to get more skill health, making it a little bit larger. Once this is charged up, yeah, it is effectively on the defensive side just as much as any of the shield is basically just as strong as a Striker or a Heartbreaker. They basically all have the same layout anyway. The layout is always similar, and we really just pick, do we take a chest of the gear set or not? Here, of course, yeah, I'm not, because that increasing the amount of marked targets, that's not going to really make any difference at all, especially if it costs us a damage talent like this. We are taking Equalizer, perfect obliterate once again here. And then, yeah, 4 pieces of CoCo. 3 of them have been record here. That makes it so as well that it isn't per se a starter build, but I wouldn't also actually recommend this as the first tech tank that you make. This one, because of its stacking mechanic and being more group orientated, I would maybe keep this if you are a player that runs tech tanks a lot and wants to run them in group settings, because yeah, once this gets charged up, and it can charge up in a group pretty quickly, it is one of the stronger tech tanks, especially because it keeps its stacks quite a lot, and will go into the next fight, especially the Heartbreaker, for instance, loses its stacks in 50 seconds. The Striker with the Obliterate Chest loses all of its stacks in 75 seconds. CoCo here takes 5 minutes, or 5 minutes, 50 seconds to go from full stacks, 35 to 0. So it can retain its stacks a little bit better. You could also, if you really wanted to make this work solo, you could, for instance, build up charges at the range, but if I'm doing that, I've already swapped build. That would be so tedious that, to me, it would not be worth it. Yeah, we are recording several CoCo pieces, and again, in the same way as the other tech tanks, we are taking a Memento and Technician. For a starting player, again, they aren't the easiest parts to get together. You need to unlock Technician, you need to get a Memento. It is in the general pool. It is in retaliation with a blueprint. And yeah, we'll just pair it with ARs, especially here. We could even go SMGs if we wanted to. SMGs do have more damage when you are close range. And yeah, this is a build that does get close range, but I find myself wanting a weapon that we can actually use at kind of mid-range as well. Sometimes I don't want to per se close that distance. I just want to deal with that one red all the way over there without actually running all the way over there. So I do like running it with ARs, but yeah, do consider actually here especially, and the Striker one, we can go with multiple weapon types. We can go with SMGs, we can go with even shotguns if you really wanted to try it out. Of course, with the Striker one, we have the ACS, and that is actually a powerful tool on that one. With both of these as well, Strikers and CoCo both are agnostic about weapon types, because they just feed into, well, Strikers into rate of fire and its own stacking mechanic that is a separate multiplier, and CoCo just feeds into weapon damage that will apply to all weapons. Where, for instance, the Heartbreaker one, there we definitely want to run the AR just to get that bonus active from the gear set. Overall, not a highly recommended one, but one to consider if you do want to play that tech tank style in a group setting. I've enjoyed it in group settings, and yeah, I've really disliked it solo. So I would really, if you're going with this, have an option for solo play, and that's exactly what I have here. I have it alongside of the Striker, and that kind of mitigates its issues. And lastly, on this character, 3.16 high-end PFE SMG. As we see here, as a humble brag, of course, as well, yeah, we have several 13 PFEs, 6 of them, in fact. And yeah, this is the build that I'm using, my 6 13 PFEs that I have. I have 9 in total, 6 of them are here just to make it a very highly PFE'd build. Especially because also this SMG one, it works well to have this, because the one option that 13 PFEs really opens up for a protection from elite build is that we can take other specialization than survivalist. Generally, we would take survivalist, which also has 10% PFE. So if we have only 12s here, well, only 12s. If we have all 12s here, we would land on 72. We could take survivalist for a further 10 and then hit the cap at 80, because yeah, it does cap at 80. PFE is one of those stats that, yeah, does cap out, and you can't go above that without well, currently in no means. With crit chance, of course, we've had, for instance, modifiers and such that have increased it over, that we could go over with the modifier and such. Here with these certain PFEs, I'm landing on 78, and yeah, that opens it up to, for instance, be a firewall. And of course, firewall is really good for its bonuses. When we have proximity on enemies, any enemy that is within 10 meters of us, we are giving our allies, not ourselves, but all of our allies, 10% increased damage against them. And that's already pretty strong, of course. If I'm going to rush into the middle of, let's say, an extraction, I'm giving a 10% amp to everybody that is shooting those enemies. Together with that, I myself am getting the Striker shield again, where we're getting that bonus damage that this can provide, which can be really strong. Then as well, we have here it's set up to be mostly in a damage dealing setup. We are taking actually just 3 blue cores, and then we're going with 3 red cores. Everything crit chance, crit damage, except no, that is not true, because several of these, we have 2 weapon handling rolls here. here on the holster and here on the knee pad alongside of a crit damage. Because of course, when we are running an SMG, yeah, we already have a decent amount of weapon handling or of crit chance. So we run out of, as that caps at 60 as well. We hit the cap here as well. With this weapon, we can't take all crit damage mods on it with the tack vector. So we have to take one crit chance mod there, or we could take something handling wise, but actually the underbarrel there doesn't actually have any useful ones. So we are locked to kind of, yeah, making a different decision here. What do we take then? Weapon handling, not the worst choice. Helps a little bit so that we can go more for the heads, I find. And of course, as well, it helps our reload, as we'll be reloading this one a lot. But actually, as well, as we'll see in the game in a second, I actually am using a different weapon there that has a slower reload than this, so it helps out there. Intimidate, Adrenaline Rush. Intimidate works really well for builds that are going to get close. And as we discussed, everything here is set up that I'm going to go get close. I'm going to go and hug the enemy as much as I can. We are triggering Intimidate, which needs bonus armor. Once we have bonus armor, it starts charging up, and we need to be within 10 meters of the enemy. That's actually usually the more hard thing for Intimidate. Getting bonus armor, well, through talents and such, we can get that. Getting within 10 meters of an enemy is sometimes more difficult, but this is, of course, the build to do it. We have protection from those elites, and especially if we're just mostly fighting elites, we are reducing their damage by a lot. Then we are taking Adrenaline Rush, that is to trigger Intimidate, of course, but also Adrenaline Rush just by itself, especially if I'm, for instance, again, at the end of a countdown, just rushing into that extraction just to distract everything and then maybe take care of some of the medics, some of the support stations that may have been put down. This will trigger off of each instance of an enemy up to 5 times. I'm totally not checking in the game. Stacks up to 3 times, as I had to just double check for a second. That stacks up to 3 times, and that, of course, each 5 seconds is regenerating. So every 3 seconds, this talent resets, basically. So unless they eat through all of that bonus armor, which they'll have a hard time because their damage is getting reduced by a lot because of that protection from elite, yeah, you're very tanky, especially when multiple enemies are around you. I'm taking the Coyote here as well, and actually the intention with the Coyote is that I'm going to go get the close range buff for everybody. Most Coyotes, of course, if the player is playing it kind of right, they're going to be mostly in the mid-range buff. This one is going to close the distance and try to get everybody the close range buff. 25 crit damage. Of course, as well, I myself am at the crit cap already. I wouldn't even benefit from the mid-range buff from somebody else. I could actually set it up, or we could take more weapon handling rolls instead of the crit chance. Just to open up a little bit of a gap for a mid-range buff. But I'm just basically setting it up kind of even for solo. Because solo, I do grab this as well. Let's go into the game where we have it saved actually similarly, but actually with a different weapon. But one that I don't have a great 30, so I didn't show it on the build picture there. But I find actually that taking this Vector SPR 9mm, its burst DPS is a little bit lower than the attack vector, but its sustain is a little bit better, and that actually gets, overall, will benefit more from the weapon handling as it has a slower reload than the attack vector. The attack vector on this build with the little bit of weapon handling that it has is a 146. This one is a 2.05. Still a pretty long reload, relatively, for SMGs, because it is still a fast reload, of course, in comparison to ARs or LMGs or such. But yeah, that little bit of extra weapon handling helps out here. But of course, yeah, if I had the graded weapon, yeah, I have a great attack vector, so that's likely the weapon I'm going to take if we're taking this to somewhere where it matters a lot. And then, yeah, what we're trying to do is especially get into enemies' faces, get that shield out, get those bonuses on the enemy, and then survive decently well. Of course, the brand bonuses I'm taking here are all towards damage as well. A Sokolov and a Grupo, kind of leaning into that damage, and especially for solo, if I run into some rogues, when Isaac says rogue agents detected, most of the time I'm just going to pull out this and make a really easy time of it for myself. They can't really hurt me, the rogues themselves. Their skills can, so I do need to watch out for that. If they get, for instance, a mortar turret out or something, I need to watch out where that goes. But for the rest of it, I'm just going to close the distance, and the rogues themselves, they're just going to, well, I'm going to just be a wave, a tsunami washing over them effectively. And outside of that as well, for some fights, this can be really strong. And then this one is really set up to be a damaging variant of it. And, well, I'm going to just be a wave, a tsunami washing over them effectively. And outside of that as well, for some fights, this can be really strong. And then this one is really set up to be a damaging variant of it. And I do like them this way. We already saw on character 1, for instance, where we had a very tanky one with regen, and then also, for instance, Vanguard and Galvanize to give buffs to the allies. We, on character 2, saw a striker variant of a PFE build. This one is just a damage dealing one just by itself, and then also, yeah, not based on, for instance, that chest striker. That chest striker can definitely outdamage this once it reaches into the high stacks, but this doesn't need to reach all the way up in into those high stacks, and has a lot more survivability, even with one blue core less, because of that adrenaline rush that gets that just will pop up every 5 seconds, because yeah, that bonus armor we get here, 60% bonus armor if 3 enemies are near us. They need to eat through that, and every 5 seconds it just pops back up. So if we're kind of in the middle of a pack, yeah, that works out really well. And they, especially, yeah, extraction, for instance, in Countdown, a really good place to run these as a dispersion and distraction mechanic. Now, of course, for those fights, I would still say that from an opportunity cost kind of thinking, like if we really want to min-max the team, if we're just taking 7 strikers, is this the 8th build I would put alongside of it? Maybe I would take a Hazard Protected Foam Eclipse. Maybe I would take a healer before this, but then I would take this. And then, yeah, this, of course, has a very aggressive playstyle, which I really enjoy. So because of that, yeah, they definitely have a place. Going back to the build picture, we have, this being a little bit of a harder build for newer players to get together. We are using 3 pieces of improvised gear. You do take those improvised pieces, and they are there because normally pieces on the gloves, the knee pad, and the holster, they don't have a mod slot. What the improvised pieces have is that they do have a mod slot, but of course they don't have a brand bonus. So effectively what we're doing is trading the brand bonus for a mod slot. Now, for crit damage mods and stuff, that doesn't work out because, for instance, Grupo is 13% and the mods are 12%, unless you're run out of places to put bonuses. But we don't have any brands with 13% PFE, or 12% PFE, or any percent protection from elites. Because of that, we're taking these just to get extra mod slots where we can stick in those protection from elite mods. And these pieces you need to craft, that costs some resources, and they're never going to be really great coming out of the crafting station. Because of that, they are very costly to optimize up. And alongside of that, you need several protection from elite mods. That's not per se too hard. Sometimes the 12% have been on the vendors. Farming gear mods, you will get enough eventually. But yeah, this can be especially expensive for those 3 improvised pieces. And because of that, not per se a starting build for newer players. But it is one that on every character, as I said before, I have a PFE build, and there's a good reason, especially rogue fights, but then also for some masters and such, they really can make the difference. Not per se this one, but other ones have made it so that recruiter fight, it's much easier if there's one PFE player there together with several damage dealers than having 4 damage dealers. And there are several situations where things like that will matter. Overall, a recommended build, and one that is a little bit expensive, but worth having. And with that, we come to the end of Character 3, all 16 loadouts we have looked at. And as with most of my characters, they do have a very varied set. I do try to actually spread around what builds kind of end up on which characters, just to give me something that I enjoy playing on each character. And that is kind of my, the philosophy behind those builds as well a little bit, just to spread them out, have everybody kind of have a little bit of everything, making it so that each of those characters actually does see some use, unlike having, for instance, one character that's a raid one that just gets used for that and such. But yeah, here we saw all 16 loadout slots for this character. One that I quite enjoy a lot, because they do have my striker tech tank that I really enjoy, that we nowadays can take to a tech tank as well. And actually, the combat medic came over to this character just for instance to have it alongside of the striker TurDro Hybrid, just to share those pieces, for instance. That has helped out, as character 2 got a new fresh Umbra combat medic over there. And yeah, they have a varied set of things that I enjoy running, including the Redify and Umbra as well. I enjoy Umbra just for its basis in different kind of charging mechanic. And because of that, I actually really do like its playstyle. It changes things up enough just to go to a different talent. Even if it isn't the top damage dealer, I'm fine with that if there is other enjoyable things about it. And yeah, we do have a nice and varied set of things here. And yeah, with the new addition of the CoCos, of course, they even got that CoCo TechTank. So definitely some in here that, have also been copied over to Character 5, which we'll see in the future, which is kind of the smorgasbord of builds I like, effectively, is on second account. But yeah, we got a little bit rambly in some of these, but I hope you still enjoyed it as we went through all of these builds, and I can explain what they're for and how you can get them together if that is your intention, how hard it would be. We'll continue, of course, on to Character 4 next, as that is 4.01 all the way to 4.16, and then, of course, in the future as well, we'll go to Character 5. Likely though, somewhere in here we'll have the modifier, this season's modifiers only tips come out, as that, of course, I also want to do. But yeah, these ones I actually recorded a little bit earlier than they're coming out, just to have them ready for that and opening up some space. I hope you did enjoy this one. If you did, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. It does help out, so I'll do that little bit of shilling here. And I hope to see you in the future. And as always, have a good night.